Hello everyone, my name is Hyder Abbas. I welcome you to this one short video on the Spring Core. Whenever you want to learn the Spring Framework or the Spring Boot, Spring Framework, both of them are same. A way to use the Spring Framework, one of the easier way to work with the Spring Framework is Spring Boot, which anyway you will understand in this entire one short video. You will understand by default the difference between Spring Framework and the Spring Boot. Fine, both of that will be covered here. So basically Spring Core is one of the most important module of the entire Spring Framework. It will give you the purpose why Spring Framework, how to work with the Spring Framework. You'll get the complete picture on the Spring Framework. So we will be developing the applications with the XML approach, annotation approach, pure Java configuration and annotation approach, and also with the Spring Boot approach from the scratch to the all important annotations and the method which you must be knowing it. Okay, so the prerequisite for this one short video would be Java. You should be comfortable with Java. If you know core Java properly, all the concepts of oops, only then you can understand the Spring Framework. It is not a new language. You're not going to understand a new syntax here. So whatever you have already learned, it's like how to work with Java in a better way. Fine. So I am pretty sure that at the end of this entire one short video, you will have a big picture of the entire Spring Framework. You'll be knowing how to work with it. And also you will be comfortable with all the important annotations which you must be knowing it. And you will be also knowing how to create the applications with the Spring Boot. Fine. So also you can join our WhatsApp channel. You can find the link in the description or in the community post. You can follow me on the Instagram, on the LinkedIn. I'm coming up with the affordable Udemy courses also. You can find the Udemy courses videos in the YouTube channel. I mean the same YouTube channel you can find the videos, and also you can join the WhatsApp channel. There also you can find it. And those who join the WhatsApp channel, for them, whenever I launch a new Udemy courses for initial learners, I'll be giving free of cost. That free of cost will be, the coupons will be shared only in the WhatsApp channel. So better you can join the community. I'll not be posting any spams there. It will be only informative parts which only I can share. Others cannot put anything in that channel, so you'll not be seeing any spams there. So do consider joining that. And also you can support me by enrolling to the Udemy courses, which I'll be publishing one by one. Right now at this moment only unit testing with JUnit is there, but going forward I'll be having the courses on SQL. I'll be having the courses on multi-threading, then Java new features, reactive programming, Spring AI, microservices, Linux commands, AWS, DevOps, and many more. All of them are right now in the recording and the editing stage. Fine. So having said that, let's start the journey of Spring Framework from absolute scratch. Hello and welcome back. As we have discussed, we are going to start this series from absolute scratch. First, we need to understand why Spring Framework, what problem Spring Framework is trying to solve. Whenever you try to learn about the Spring Framework, you will often hear the term Spring Framework is there to decouple the dependencies between the classes, decouple the dependencies between the components of an application. Also, you will hear about dependency injection, inversion of control. We need to understand what exactly tight coupling, loose coupling, and what problem Spring is trying to solve. So here I'll be developing one simple Java project, core Java project, and we'll try to understand the purpose of Spring Framework. We'll understand what problem Spring Framework is trying to solve without using the Spring Framework with the help of normal Java project, so that you can understand what is the context, why Spring Framework, people are behind the Spring Boot. We need to understand. If why is clear, what exactly how to work with the Spring Framework will not be a matter of concern. So let's try to understand directly by writing some code here. I would like to open the IDE. I'm using Eclipse IDE. You can use any IDE of your own choice, which will not create any problem here. Fine. Suppose I have two classes here. Let me write down some classes here. As you can see, I have written two classes here. We have alpha class, we have beta class. Inside the alpha class, I have a alpha method. Assume some important business logic is there. What logic? It's not a matter of concern. Again, I would like to repeat here, core Java is the requirement to understand the Spring Framework. Without core Java, you cannot understand. I'm keeping in mind those who are watching me, they know core Java, they are comfortable with Java. Fine. Alpha class, I have one method alpha and some important business logic is present here. We have beta and I'm writing some logic here, some logic. Between the logic, there is a need that whatever code which is being written here, whatever important business logic code which we have already written here, I want to reuse here inside the beta method. That means I want to use that. I want that to work for me here. What is the big deal in that? We just have to invoke this method. That means we just have to create the object of alpha. We can invoke that method by achieving something called as composition. I'll create the object of alpha, alpha type A equals to new alpha, and I can just give a call. Very usual approach, right? I wanted to use whatever code which we have written there here in my beta method. So I'll say a dot alpha, a dot alpha. I can call it. That means whatever code we have written here, I can use it here. Now, if you do so in this composition, this method we also call it as composition, creating the object of the class and calling the method, whatever method functionality or the behavior you want to use, that method you have to invoke by creating the object. If you do this, then alpha and beta class will be tightly coupled with each other. They are tightly bonded with each other. That means something goes wrong in the alpha class, it will have impact on the beta class also. Example, someone has deleted, not just deleted, something went wrong there. You can see something has gone wrong in the alpha class. It has an impact in the beta class. Beta class got affected and we are getting one error in the beta class. See, we are getting one compile time error. Eclipse, IntelliJ IDEA, all these IDs has the auto compilers, and the moment you can see compile time error. That means beta class also got affected. So composition is not a way to invoke the method. What? Can we make it static and call? There also you are going to use alpha name, right? Class name you'll use it, alpha dot alpha method. Even if you make it static, fine. So now they are tightly coupled with each other. Do we have any alternative for this? We can do one more thing here. What we can do is we can say extends alpha. The moment I say extends alpha, whatever methods we have inside the alpha class, that will get inherited inside the beta also. So inside the beta, we do have this method, we do have this business logic. So wherever I need, without creating the instance, I can directly call the method, because alpha method is also part of beta class, if you know the concept of inheritance in Java. So I can call it, no problem. But again, still this class is tightly coupled with alpha because you have extended alpha. Suppose I'll not consider, I'll delete this class. You can see here, I'm getting one error here. That means even if you go with extends with the concept of inheritance, you don't want to go with composition. You want to achieve that. You want to use the service of other classes by going with inheritance. That is also not recommended. Even if you do so, your classes will get tightly bonded with each other. Fine. Now alpha and beta class are tightly coupled, tightly bonded with each other. Now, whatever logic we have inside the alpha class, I want to use that service. I want to use that business logic inside my beta class, in one more class. It could be alpha, beta, any class, doesn't matter. Inside this class, without taking the name of alpha. I will not even take the alpha name. I will not say extends alpha. I will not even go for the object creation composition. No inheritance, no composition. I will just be in a position to invoke this method without any reference of alpha in my beta class. That means without taking a name of alpha inside my beta class. That means one class should be in a position to use the services of another class without having any name of that class. I will not use the name, no static methods also. The class name only I will not use. I will not create the object directly inside my beta class. I will not say extends. I will not even use the name of alpha. No extends, no composition. I'll not even use a name. Still, I should be in a position to call whatever services we have inside the alpha class, whatever behavior we have inside my alpha class. Then, if I could able to achieve that, then I can say alpha class and beta class. These two classes are loosely bounded. They are not tightly coupled. That means we could able to achieve loose coupling. But how can we do that? Either we have to go with inheritance or we may have to go with composition. How can we make two classes loosely coupled with each other? That is what we need to understand here. For a moment, whatever code I have written here, I would like to comment. Now, always remember, I would like to develop one basic project here. Fine. Before that, whenever you write, you are going to write a services, a business logic, which is getting used by other classes. Then that service class is there. No, don't write direct implementation. As per the strategy design pattern, it says that whenever you want to write any business logic, a class where the actual services are written, which will be used by another classes, that class don't write the direct implementation. Always code to interface. Write an interface, define what you want to do, and then implement in the class. This class must be coded to the interface. Interface, you know very well, it's one of the way to achieve the abstraction. And if a class is implementing an interface, then that class, if any need arises, can implement any other interface also, can extend any other class also. So if a class is implementing an interface, it will not affect that class in any way. So a business logic, whenever you want to write, that means such a logic where this logic might be used in some other classes. Someone might call this method, then don't directly write this class, always code to interface. What do we mean by that? We will practically also understand. Fine. So let me just develop one simple project here. I would like to go and create one package here called as, maybe the package name, I'm going to give it as services. Whatever package name you want, you can give. Here I would like to create one class. Name of the class, maybe I'll give it as whatever name. It could be anything. Maybe let's give the YouTube channel name, which is T-shaped skills. Name of the class it is on my YouTube name. Okay, I have created it. Great. Now inside the class, I'll be writing one method here. Maybe the method name is very simple. Understand? I'll say here public, and I'll say here boolean by the course, and I would like to accept here double type of amount, and again, now within this, for now I would like to return true, because we have to return any boolean value. Great. Now guys, inside this method, I want to invoke methods of different classes. That means I'll have 2, 3, 4 more classes, and whatever methods I have written inside those classes, I want to invoke. That means the logic, the behavior which is being written in another classes, I want to use that logic inside this method. However, inside this entire T-shaped skill class, I'll not be using the reference or name of any of those classes. Fine. Now let me define those business classes whose services will be used inside this particular class called as T-shaped skills. Now those are my business logic. Those are my service or behaviors which will be used in my T-shaped skills. That means those classes I should not be writing directly. I should always code to interface. I'll create one interface here. You will get the complete picture if you are with me till the end, and if you know core Java. I would like to just code here. I will create one interface name, whatever you want. Maybe I'll give it as iCourses, or maybe iCourse. Anything is fine. Within this, I'll specify the requirement. Maybe I'll specify the requirement as return type as boolean type of get the course. Whatever name of the method you want, you can give it. So maybe I would like to accept here double type of amount, or the cost, or whatever you want, you can give here. Maybe the price, anything is fine. That should not be a problem. All right, price. Great. Now I will write 3 classes which are implementing these interfaces. The 3 classes are, let me just create here. Class number 1, maybe I'll give the name of the class as Java class, and it is going to implement one interface called as iCourse. All right. I would like to just import this. Great. Similar to this, I would like to create 2 more classes. Let me just create 2 more classes quickly. Maybe the name of the class, I would like to give it as not Java. I would like to give it as SpringBoot. All right. And maybe one more class I would like to use here. Maybe 2 classes are sufficient for now. It's more than sufficient. We have SpringBoot and we have a Java course. Inside this, whatever business logic you want, you can write. I'll write the business logic here. Very simple business logic. Maybe I'll say here system.out.println. I will say here Java course is purchased successfully, and fees paid is, I would like to just add the price which we have paid here. After which I'm going to just return here true to the caller of this method. Fine. Same business logic I would like to specify in my Spring Boot class. I would like to go here and just write down. Okay. I would like to just go and write here, and I would like to say the message as SpringBoot. SpringBoot. Wonderful. Okay, I'm done with this. Great. And I would like to go here and write down this. Fine. So I have two classes. One is Java class, one is Spring Boot class. Fine. Now inside the T-shaped skills, whatever logic which is written inside my Java class, I want to invoke, I want to use. Whatever logic which is written inside the Spring Boot, this business logic, I want to use in my T-shaped skills class. Options are there. As we have discussed, composition, I can just create the object of Java. Java type j equals to new Java. And I can just say here, Java dot, I can just invoke the method get the course. And whatever price we do have here, this entire amount or price, whatever is the variable name, I can just pass here. It will return Boolean value, true or false. If you want, you can collect it, or directly you can return. I'll say here, return. Whatever this method will return me, a Boolean data, I will return to the caller of this method. That's about the core Java. Now, again, you are making T-shaped skills and Java class. They both are getting tightly coupled with each other. It's a tight coupling, tightly bonding. I want to achieve loose coupling. That means I want to invoke the method which is there inside my Java class, inside my Spring Boot class, without taking the name of Spring Boot, without taking a name of Java. I'll not be creating the object inside the T-shapes class. I'll not be using the extends keyword, but still I should be in a position to invoke. Now the question is, those two service classes, business classes, Java and Spring Boot, have you written direct implementation? Or have you coded to interface? We have coded to interface. We have followed the strategy design pattern. Great. So now what I'm going to do here is, I'll go here and create the reference of private. I'll say here, iCourse type course. Fine. And I would like to write one setter. Maybe let me just go and generate one setter here. I would like to say here, generate the getters and setters. I want to just generate the only setters. I would like to select it. I'm getting one setter also. Great. Now, encapsulation, whatever oops concepts are there, I am keeping in mind that all of you are comfortable with it. Now you will also see here real use of polymorphism. As per the runtime polymorphism, using the parent type reference, using the interface type reference, can we invoke the implementing methods, overridden methods of a child class? The answer is yes. The real use of polymorphism also you are able to see here. If you already know what is polymorphism, suppose if you don't know what is interface, what is polymorphism, what are the oops concept, then you can never understand what is Spring framework. Fine. That is the reason I have told core Java is the prerequisites before getting into the Spring framework. But anyway, I'm going to use here course dot. I've not told any class name. I've just told course dot. Get the course. I'm going to pass the amount which we are receiving here. Whatever that method will return me, that method directly I'm going to return to the caller of this method. Fine. Very straightforward it is. And of course, this get the course is available in Java class also. It is available in the Spring Boot class also. For both of them, the parent happens to be the course, which is iCourse. They have been implemented by coding to interface, no direct implementation. Java is also implementing iCourse. Spring Boot is also implementing iCourse. So their parent is iCourse. So using that parent type reference, I can definitely invoke the methods which are there inside those classes. Now look at the T-shaped skills entire class. Anywhere did I use the Java name or Spring Boot name? Anywhere. Java, Spring Boot, nowhere. Fine. That means T-shaped skills now able to use the services which are there inside the Java, inside the Spring Boot without having to take their names here. Loose coupling. But wait. It's just an interface reference, right? It's the part 2 of this story is still pending. We will discuss on this. But now to start with, I hope you are able to understand this much. Let me go back to the main method here. So in the main method class, I'll go here. Of course, this is not needed. I would like to just go here, get this. Fine. Now, please understand, I would like to create the object of T-shaped skills class. The class which is using the services of other class. Maybe I'll say here T equals to new T-shaped skills. New T-shaped skills. It is done. Great. I would like to import that, after which I will just invoke the method T dot by the course. I'll just put some amount here, a random amount. That's fine. and after which it will give me any boolean type of return type. I would like to collect it, boolean type of, maybe I'll say here status. And now I will just check if in case if the status is true, I would like to say here maybe success, one success message. Else I'll say here, else I will say system.out.println fail to get the course, Great. Now what I'm going to do is I will say t dot set course, I course. Now here I'm going to pass the object called as Java object I'm passing here by using set. So that means Java object, either you can pass directly Java object, or you can just create the Java type j equals to new Java. A new Java object you can create, and you can just pass the reference. Both of them are same, and you can just pass j here. Both of them are same. So directly I'm passing the Java object in the set course. Now let me open the t-shape skills setter method. Inside the setter, what am I getting here? Java object. That means it is equivalent to I course type course equals to new Java. If you know the polymorphism, it is equivalent to this, because from the main method I am passing Java object here to the t dot set course, and I'm passing Java object. What am I receiving here? I'm receiving Java object here, right? So it is equivalent to whatever code you could able to see here, and as per the polymorphism, this is allowed. Now whatever is there here, that object address you're passing here, that means inside the course which object address we have? Java object address. Now if I say course dot get the course, that means get the course method of Java class will be invoked. Whatever method we have here inside the Java class, that will be invoked. Why? Because what am I receiving here? Java object. If you pass their Spring Boot, of course I will just take this. I'll say t dot set, and I'm going to pass the Spring Boot object. Great. And of course I would like to comment this for now. You can see now I'm passing the Spring Boot object. So what is receiving here? I'm receiving Spring Boot object here. It is equivalent to iCourse type course equals to new Spring Boot class. That means inside this address of Spring Boot object is present. And if you say course dot get the course method of Spring Boot will be executed. Now, please see. Actually, in my T-shaped skills class, I am using the services or business logic of whatever is being written inside the Java class, whatever is being written inside the Spring Boot class. That means I want to use the services, but am I creating the object of Java or Spring Boot? No, I'm inverting the entire control of object creation to my main method class. I'm inverting the entire control of object creation to the main method class. Now main method class is creating the object of Java, is creating the object of Spring Boot. Now two terms you have to understand. One is target class, one is dependent object, or you can say target object or dependent object. What do we mean by target object? Such a object who is using services of other class. From the main method perspective, from the main method, we have three more classes, right? T-shaped skills class, Java class, and Spring Boot class. Out of these three classes we have, one class is a target class, two classes are dependent object, or target object, dependent object. What do you mean by that? Target object or target class is such a class where services of other classes are being used. That means that is a T-shaped only. Inside the T-shaped class only, are you not using the services methods which is coded in other classes? The answer is yes. Making sense? That means now from this perspective, my T-shaped skill is there, no? That is only called as target class. That is my target. Dependent object, whose classes services are being used, that is called as dependent object. That means inside the T-shaped, whose classes services are being used here? Get the course is present inside which object, which class? Java class, Spring Boot class. That means Spring Boot and Java class are the dependent object. Such objects whose services will be used inside my target class. Inside the T-shaped skills class, I am going to use methods, services of the Java class, of the Spring Boot class. That means the Spring Boot and Java class are the dependent object, and T-shaped skills is the target object. Inside the T-shaped skills, I am using the methods which are coded inside my Spring Boot class, the methods which are coded inside my Java class. Now, injecting dependent object into the target class is called as dependency injection. Injecting dependent object, such an object whose services are getting used inside this target class, inside the T-shape skills, is called as dependency injection. I'm injecting this object because Spring Boot objects, this method which is present inside the Spring Boot class, that is getting used, that is my dependent object. So injecting this dependent object into my target class is called as dependency injection. Now, injecting the dependent object into my target class using setter is called as setter injection. Making sense? Now, if I just, of course, have to run this application, if I have to run as the Java application, you will see here, I'm getting which course? You can see Spring Boot course is purchased on your console. And of course, if I inject the Java, of course, it will not be Java. Java course will be purchased. That is the output which will be getting it. I would like to run this. If I just have to run this, you can see we are getting Java course purchased. Again, we might have some error here. Let me import the Java class. And again, I would like to run this. You can notice we are getting Java course purchased. Fine. Injecting the dependent object, such an object whose methods are getting used inside the T-shape. Now, if you do it through the setter, it is setter injection. If you do it through the constructor, maybe I'll say a Spring Boot constructor. That means I'm injecting the dependent object into my target class with the help of constructor is called as constructor injection. Of course, we do not have any constructor for now. I would like to just generate one constructor. I'll see a references, sources. I would like to go here, constructor using the fields. I would like to go here and generate, and we do have a constructor here. And I would like to have one more 0 parameters constructor just in case if I have to use the setter injection. So I should be having this. Okay. Now constructor is also available. I'm performing the injection through the constructor. Of course, Spring Boot will be executed right now, which you can see here. If I have to run this Spring Boot course. Now, please look at inside the T-shape skills, entire class, you can notice anywhere did I use the name Java Spring Boot? No. That means T-shaped skills class, Java class and Spring Boot class, they are loosely coupled with each other. They are not tightly coupled. That means we could able to achieve loose coupling here. That is the purpose of entire Spring framework. Right now, in my main method class, I'm creating the object of target class. I'm creating the object of dependent object. That object also I am only creating. Target object I myself developer is creating. Dependency injection, injecting the dependent object into my target class. I myself developer is performing the main method. I no want to do this also. I want all the classes objects to be created by Spring framework. Service classes, target classes, dependent object, and also dependency injection also to be performed by Spring framework itself. That means whatever code I have written here in my main method class, I want this also to be taken care by Spring framework. That means you are totally achieving loose coupling. Right now, at least from the main method and T-shaped skills, these two classes are tightly coupled, right? Because manually I'm creating the object of T-shaped skills here. Now, if something goes wrong in the T-shaped skills, main method class will get affected. So main method class and T-shaped class are still tightly coupled. T-shaped class, Java class, Spring Boot class, they are loosely coupled. But T-shaped class and main method class is tightly coupled. I don't want this also. My entire application, I want it to become a loosely coupled. I hope you are able to understand here. That means entire control of object creation, dependency injection, I am inverting to my Spring. Spring framework has to take care of it. And how Spring framework will take care of it? We should understand how to talk to Spring framework. That means about the configuration. You can communicate to Spring framework whatever task you want, Spring framework will do it for you. And there is a way you can communicate to Spring framework. That means you can configure Spring framework through the XML approach. XML plus annotation approach and annotation plus Spring Boot approach. First, initial 2 to 3 examples, few examples, I will not touch Spring Boot. We'll understand without boot. Then we will create the Spring Boot and we'll understand. There is no Spring Boot is not a different framework. Spring Boot is Spring framework plus some extra features, auto configurations, whatever little difficulty is there to talk to Spring Framework, to communicate with Spring Framework, that little difficulty is not there in the Spring Boot. So English words, I don't want to tell what is the difference between Spring and Spring Boot. I want to practically show what is the difference between Spring Framework and Spring Boot. And once we reach to the doorstep of Spring Boot, all the modules in this entire series we are going to understand using the Spring Boot itself. I hope you could able to understand this. Any ambiguity, you can rewatch the entire video any number of times. You can practice, it will make more sense to you. So the core of Spring Framework, the main feature of Spring Framework is dependency injection. Dependency injection is the main key feature or the core of the Spring Framework, through which you can develop loosely coupled applications. What is tight coupling? What is loose coupling? That we have understood in our last video, where we understood why Spring Framework. These are not the only feature of Spring Framework which we will understand fundamentally in this video. Going forward, by developing multiple applications, we will try to see, but this will be the most simplified one. Fine. So what is this dependency injection? What do you mean by loose coupling? In the video why Spring Framework, we have already understood by developing a Java program. Same thing we will understand by developing the Spring Framework also. So before you proceed further, please do watch whatever video is available in the playlist with the name Why Spring Framework. Also, inversion of control. These three key or main feature of Spring Framework we will understand by developing Spring application also. To start with, the Spring Framework is Java-based application framework. That means if you want to develop application using a Java language in a easier way with less burden on developers, we use Spring Framework. So let me add that point here. As you can see, I have added that point here. To develop a Java application in easier way with less efforts, we go with the Spring Framework, which eventually you will understand why people are behind this framework. So this framework not new. It is not a new framework. It came in 2004. The first version of Spring Framework is available from 2004, which is developed by a great personality by the name Rod Johnson. He is the one who developed this framework. In the year 2004, it was available for the use from 2004 itself. Currently, that time it was Spring 1, 1x in the sense 1.1, 1.2, and currently the framework which we have to learn, which is being used in the industry, is Spring 6. Spring 6 is what you need to understand. 6.x, 6.1, 6.2, okay, which was released in 2022. Since 2022, the requirement, the demand from the industry is for you to learn the Spring 6, version, which we will be learning in this playlist also. Is it different from the Spring Boot? The very first video of this series, Introduction to Spring Boot playlist, I have told you, practically by developing an application, I will show you the difference between Spring Framework and Spring Boot. Spring Boot is not a new framework. If you want to use Spring application, or if you want to develop the Spring based applications in a easier way with less efforts, less configuration, then we go with Spring Boot. Spring Boot is Spring Framework only, plus auto configurations and some extra features, which will make your journey of developing application using Spring Framework in a easier. That means in a easier way you can develop the application if you go with Spring Boot. And most of the modules of the Spring Framework we are going to develop using the Spring Boot only. So this series is Spring Boot series. Initially, some videos to make you understand, I'll be not using the Spring Boot. I will use the Spring Framework without boot, and then I will develop with boot, so that you can differentiate how easy it is to develop the application using the Spring Boot and why people are behind the Spring Boot. So it is Spring 6 version right now, which is Spring Boot 3. Spring Boot 3. 3x is running 3.1, 3.2, 4.2. That's the current version of the Spring Boot. So we will see Spring Boot only, but behind the scene it will use latest Spring Framework, which is Spring 6. That is also we are going to use in this playlist. Fine. So if you go with the Spring framework, you can develop the entire end-to-end application, entire end-to-end backend application you can develop using the Spring framework. What do you mean by that? If you ask me, usually in the industry, we develop layered approach. We follow something called as layered approach development. Layered approach of application development. That means when it comes to the backend part, three important layers we have in the backend. Three important layers. Let me quickly give you the insights or highlight about this fundamentally. Going forward, practically also by developing the applications, we will see on these layers. We have three important layers. One, we have the controller layer, or you can call it as a web layer. Then we have the service layer, or you can say the business layer, or you can say service layer, whatever, both of them are same layer. And then we have persistence layer. Persistence layer, or you can say DAO layer. What do you mean by that? If you ask me, every application at the end of the day have to get connected to database, whichever application it is. At the end of the day, we have a database, DBMS, whether it is SQL or no SQL. Spring supports for any type of database. So we have some DBMS here, and our application has to get connected to store the data permanently. Database is a place we keep it. Fine. So what happens here is we divide our application into three major layers. One is a web layer, one is the business layer, one is the persistence DAO layer. Here all the logic we will write which is responsible to connect to the database and to store the data, to retrieve the data, to update the data. All the DB operations we write within this layer. You'll not be getting that in the IDE. You have to define in different packages. How to do that, we will see it. You need not to worry. So basically three major layers will be there in the backend: web, business, and DAO layer, or you can say persistence layer or repository layer, whatever you can call it. Here we write the logic which is responsible to connect to the database to retrieve it, for which you can use normal plain JDBC. JDBC is the basic technology which is used in order to connect your Java application with the database and perform DB related operation. Fine. You can use any JPA framework such as Hibernate. No problem. There is no problem in that. Fine. And here to develop the web layer, you can use servlets. Basically, servlet is a one where we will write the web layer logic. That means a logic which is responsible to handle the HTTP request, incoming HTTP request, or the browser once internet networking is formed, or the browser for a web application. Web means internet based application. Fine. Which will work only if there is internet connection, internet networking if it is available. So it will be responsible to receive the request, HTTP request over the web, and the response, HTTP response. A web application, whatever logic is needed, you can develop the controllers using the servlet. You can use one of the framework for the Java developers which happens to be Struts. And here you can use the normal Java language to develop the business logic. Business logic means which has the logic which serves the actual purpose of your application. For what purpose you're developing the application? The main functionality of your application using the normal Java language. Great. Now, servlet is a technology. If you want to use the framework in place of this, we have something called as Struts which we can use. JDBC is the technology which we use as a Java developer in order to connect to the database and perform the DB related operations. Hibernate is one of the popular framework which we can use it. So here what you need to understand is Spring framework has Spring framework has something to cater every layer of your application, end-to-end application development. In order to develop the web layer, controllers, REST APIs, SOAP-based web services, or normal controller logic, we have a module in the Spring framework called as Spring Web MVC. Spring Web MVC. Here normally you can use the Spring Core functionality. If there is any need, you can use Spring AOP, separation of concerns, and by using any of the modules of the Spring framework, you can develop the business layer. Not just that. In order to support the DAO layer, in Spring, we have something called as Spring JDBC. That means Spring framework and JDBC remains as it is. we have something called as Spring Data JDBC. And to simplify the DAO layer, the hottest in the market, which every Spring developer must know, is nothing but Spring Data JPA, which is one of the game changer for the DAO layer, which you need not to put any efforts. What do you mean by that? We will learn about this. So if you say you know Spring Framework, one of the hottest module which you must know is Spring Data JPA. And we have other modules to support the business logic. We have Spring Batch, we have Spring AOP. To secure your APIs, we have Spring Security. Multiple modules are available. So to develop all the layers of your application, backend application, Spring has something to offer. Hence, if you go with the Spring Framework, you can develop end-to-end application. End-to-end application I was referring to. You can develop all the layers of your backend development. You can develop the web layer, business layer, and DAO layer using the Spring Framework. And one more important point here which you need to know about it. Spring is a versatile framework. Versatile framework. What do you mean by versatile framework? If you ask me, suppose any one layer of your application you have developed using the Spring Framework, and here you're using the struts, here you're using the Hibernate, Spring will support it. Spring can easily gel with, integrate with other frameworks. There is no restriction that you have to use Spring Framework for all the layers. Entire backend application should be developed with Spring Framework. No such requirement. Maybe the controller part, web layer, you have used servlets, or maybe you have used the struts, no problem. In the DAO layer, you have not used Spring JDBC or Data JPA. You have used Hibernate or JDBC. No problem. Spring is okay with it. Spring can gel with any other frameworks or technology to develop your application. So Spring is a versatile. But however, Spring has something to offer for all the layers of your backend development. For everything Spring, we have something to offer. In other words, what I'm trying to say is, using the Spring Framework, you can develop entire backend application. And the most important part, Spring is a modular based framework. Spring has multiple modules. Based on the new need, you can just develop or use any of the modules which we have here. That means if you want to develop the controllers, REST API, SOAP-based web services, or maybe if you want to develop a controller to cater the front-end themely for the JSP HTML pages, we have something called as Spring Web MVC is what we have. Spring Web MVC to develop the web layer of your application, to handle the request to response back, the one who faces all the requests, HTTP requests coming to your application, the web layer, Spring MVC. To support the DAO layer, that means a layer which is responsible to perform the DB operation, to store the data, to retrieve the data, to update, to delete, whatever you want to perform. The hottest in the market, we have something called as Spring Data JPA. Spring Data JPA. We do have Spring Data JDBC also, Spring ORM also, but the hottest is we have Spring Data JPA. Fine. And also we have Spring AOP to support the cross-cutting logics, the secondary logic of your application. What do you mean by that? We will see to it, to handle the exceptions, to security and other things. Practically also, we will see the use of Spring AOP in the most simplified way. To secure your APIs, we have something called as Spring Security. To support the bulk data, we have Spring Batch for the batch processing, right? Likewise, Spring has so many modules which you should be knowing it. It is a modular based framework. For everything you have a module. It's not compulsory that if you have decided to use Spring Framework for your backend application, for your Java backend application, for everything you have to use Spring. No. If you want to use Hibernate in some cases, struts or servlets in some cases, in some parts Spring, no problem. Spring Framework supports that because Spring is a versatile framework. However, if you want to develop end-to-end entire backend using the Spring, then no problem. You can use that. For everything there are modules. Whatever modules I have listed here, it is not restricted to this. We have many modules which Spring Framework supports, which we will be exploring it. But the base of all the modules, the one which you must be knowing it before getting into this, is nothing but your Spring core, the core of your Spring, the main functionality of your Spring. If you understand Spring core, then you can understand any modules of Spring Framework. If you don't know Spring Core, that means what is the core of Spring Framework? What is the problem it is trying to solve? Which is inversion of control and dependency injection. How do we develop loosely coupled application? With basic Java application in the previous video, why Spring Framework we have tried to understood. Right now we will understand that using the Spring Framework, the same thing what we have understood. So before you watch this or the upcoming videos, please do watch why Spring Framework video, which is dependency injection and loose coupling. It will make more sense to you. Alongside that, you should be very good in the core Java part. Fine. So Spring Core is what we have to understood first, which is about the dependency injection and the inversion of control. That means how to develop a loosely coupled application. We need to understand about eager initialization, lazy initialization. We have two containers here. One is a bean factory. One more is application context. What do we mean by this? We will practically, by developing the application, we will see to it, through which we have something called as dependency injection and loose coupling. If you could able to understand, then we can go ahead and understand the other modules of Spring Framework. Without this, you cannot understand. So initially, what is the goal is, I'll develop or I'll use the Spring Framework through only XML approach. Then I'll proceed further with XML plus annotation approach. Then we will proceed further with SpringBoot approach. SpringBoot, of course, there also annotations are being used. Annotations, which supports auto configuration. Auto configuration means whatever efforts usually it takes to develop the Spring application using the Spring Framework, application using the Spring Framework. If you go with SpringBoot, the efforts will be lesser. That's it. It is, in simplified words, if I have to tell you how SpringBoot is different from the Spring Framework, we will understand with the key points also going forward. But for now, if you go with SpringBoot, you can develop application using the Spring Framework in a easier way with less or minimal configuration. There are some efforts you have to do in order to talk to Spring Framework to get your things done, to enable the dependency injection, inversion of control, and to develop the application usually, dependency injection especially. But if you go with SpringBoot and annotation, it is little easier. That's it. We will understand that. So we'll see all three ways, and then you will only tell me which approach should I use in order to go further and understand the other modules of SpringBoot, or other modules of the Spring Framework. All these modules in this series will understand or we will develop using the SpringBoot itself. This is a SpringBoot, entire playlist will be on the SpringBoot, but SpringBoot is not, it's something new or other than Spring Framework. It is Spring Framework only, just easier way to work with Spring Framework. That's it. So initially, few applications, no SpringBoot. Then we will get into the SpringBoot so that you can understand the difference. You can understand the behind the scene, what is happening, and in real, how to use the Spring Framework. Making sense? So this is something, a basic picture of your Spring Framework. More on this we'll understand. In the last video, we have understood why Spring Framework, which is dependency injection, loosely coupling. Same thing we'll see by using the Spring Framework. Then we shall move ahead step by step. Fine. In this video, let's develop our first application using the Spring Framework. But before you get into this, as we have understood in the Spring overview video, that means introduction to Spring Framework video, that the base of all the Spring modules is Spring Core. In order to understand SpringBoot or all the modules of any of the modules of Spring Framework, you should be knowing it Spring Core, and that is what we are going to learn from here. However, we also have developed one application, one Java application. We understood the prime use of the Spring Framework, which is dependency injection and application development with loose coupling. What is loose coupling? What is dependency injection? By developing one Java project, we have understood earlier. So kindly watch that video, why Spring Framework dependency injection video in this playlist. Also, please do watch Spring overview, that video also, before you get into this particular video. And also you can watch this entire playlist, all the videos of this playlist in 1.5x speed or 2x speed. If you are in hurry, still you will be in a position to understand. Fine. So if you want, you can watch it in normal pace also, but however, if you are in hurry, you can also watch it in 1.5x speed. The speed of the video is what I am talking here. Now let's get into the Spring Core. The main functionality of the Spring framework, what we have understood is dependency injection with the help of inversion of control. What do we mean by that? How in the Java project we have understood previously. Now also we'll understand by developing one application which is very core of your Spring framework, for which I'll be developing one Maven project. I'll not develop one plain Java project. It will be a Maven project. About the Maven, we can have a detailed discussion maybe going forward also. But for now, I would like to give you a brief overview why we may have to develop the Maven project. Why as a Java developer, people use Maven build tool in order to develop the project. Now, whenever you want to use or you want to take the user input, you're going to use one predefined class called as scanner. Likewise, in Java, so many predefined classes are there. String class, array list, linked list, scanner class. Like this, so many predefined classes are there, which is coded by Java team. The one who developed the language, they have done this coding. And you need not do anything. You just have to import in order to use those predefined classes, which you have seen in your Java also. So why that happened? Because at the time of downloading Java, you're not just downloading Java or JVM, you're downloading entire Java development kit, JDK. That means all the predefined classes which is coded by Java team also got downloaded. That means the library files, the code which is done by Java team, that also got into your system. And whenever you want to use in your Java code, you can just write one import statement and you can use the classes or the code which is developed by Java team. Great. But Spring framework currently owned by VMware, and it is developed in 2004 by Rod Jensen, as we have seen in the last video also. It is not owned by Oracle. It is not owned by Java team. That means it is not developed by Java team. It is developed by a separate team of dedicated developers. Now, I want to use predefined classes, predefined interfaces, annotations which Java team has already developed. I want to use that in my application. From where I will get this code? I may have to download that library file, right? That means if you want to download Java code which is coded by someone else, the library file of Java code which is coded by someone else, and you want that to be used in your project, then they'll be putting that in the form of jar, Java RQ file. Jar means it is a collection of .class files, compiled file of Java code. That means if someone has coded, example, I have developed one class here. It has some precious code, and for which whenever you want in your code, you can just use it without you have to write the entire code. You can just create the instance and call the methods for which I have given the logic. So what I will be doing is I will make a jar of my code and I will upload on the internet. Now, if you want to use the class or the code which is developed by me in your code, you just have to download the jar and you just have to add into your project. Making sense? So similarly, if I want to use the Spring framework, it is developed by a separate, dedicated team, right? So I have to go to the Google, search for Spring framework jar file, where all the predefined classes, interfaces, annotation which is coded by Spring framework are present. I have to download it. Then in my Java project, I have to add that jar file. Only then I can use the classes or the code which is coded by the Spring framework. I can use in my application. So whatever I'm speaking right now, if your Java is strong, you are in a position to understand. If not, please have a good hold of Java. Now, if you don't want that to do, if you create a Maven project, then you can just talk to Maven project inside one. Whenever you create a Maven project, there will be one file called as pom.xml. So inside this file, you can talk to Maven. Hey, look, I'm going to use the Spring framework. Please do me a needful. On behalf of us, Maven will go to Google. Maven will download that jar file, and Maven only will add that required jar file, that library file which is coded by a Spring team. That entire library Maven will add into our project. We need not to go to Google manually, download the jar file, add that to our project. All this process is not needed. On behalf of us, Maven will do that. So only we create a Maven project. More on this by, automatically as you proceed further, you will be in a position to understand. So we are going to create the Maven projects here also. And also when you are developing the Spring Boot application, there also you will have an option to create the Maven project. How to create, we will see to it. You need not to worry about this. Fundamentally, I hope you got an idea why Maven we have to use. It is more than sufficient for now. So let me open the IDE here. I would like to go with Eclipse IDE. You can use any IDE of your own choice. That should not be a problem here. And I would like to also consider the application which we have developed before in this particular playlist. I'll say our file. I'll say new Maven project is there. Okay, new Maven project. So create a simple project. Next, group ID means it's kind of package. I'll say here maybe com.t-shaped skills is a name I'll give here. It's like a project name. Artifact ID I would like to give here as a Spring Core 01, and that will be my project name also. Okay, and then I will say here finish. That's all. The project will be ready. You can see here Spring project is ready. It is building. You can see here building. It is ready now. I would like to go to the pom.xml, and here is where I have to talk that please do me a needful. What is that I want? I have to speak here itself that I want to develop one Spring application for which I don't have Spring dependency. That means I don't have a jar file. I don't have the library of Spring framework to use the predefined classes, annotations, and interfaces which is coded by Spring team. I don't have that. How to activate the Spring framework? For I need a Spring library. So I have to talk and ask my Maven to get it for me. For which I have to go to a repository called as Maven repository, Maven mvn repository.com, and just search for Spring. If you search for Spring, you'll get the option Spring context. In the Maven repository, you will get a way to talk to Maven build tool. That's it. You can see latest Spring framework is what I'm going to use here. Any Spring 6 version you can use. It should not be a matter of concern. It is like adding one dependency. Dependency in the sense you are talking to Maven what you need, and you should add within one tag called as dependency stack. Dependency stack, and within this I would like to add this dependencies tag. Okay, dependencies tag. So it should work here also. It should not create any problem. Maybe there is a spelling mistake here. Dependencies. There is a spelling mistake. Dependencies. Now the problem is resolved. That means with this you are asking, you are speaking to your Maven that look, I am dependent on Spring framework library. I want Spring 6 library. Can you please add that into my project? The moment I do this, I'll save this. I will just go and update my POM. I'll say right click, Maven, update the project. I will say update. Okay. The moment you do this, the project will get updated. Suddenly you will get something called as one extra folder, Maven dependencies. If you open this, you can see you're getting all the jar files for the Spring Core. That means now you can use the predefined classes, methods, annotations, interfaces, which is coded by Spring framework. That library you have added into your project. Nothing you have done it. You just added one dependency. You're talking to Maven that look, I am dependent on Spring framework library. Can you please do me a needful? The moment you have told this to Spring, to the Maven will go download the jar and add that to your projects. So in your project now, all the Spring library has been added. The jar files of the Spring framework has been added. Fine. Now, there is a better way to create a Spring Boot applications which we will see to it. Initially, few applications, Spring Core without boot. Then same application with Spring Boot will develop. And all the modules of our application going forward, we are going to learn Spring Boot only. Fine. Now, we have got that here. There is something called as source/main/resources. All the resources of your application we may have to add here. And then we do have this. Let me go and create one package here. I would like to create one package here called as main package, where I will have my main method class. Right click. I will say here, I would like to go and say here, launch the application. Launch the application with our main method. Now, I would like to reuse the code which we have developed in our Why Java video, loosely coupled application. I want to develop the same, for which I'll do one thing. I'll go back to this project. We do have something called as services. I want to take that. I want to get it here. I want to get it here. Okay. You can see we have got that same. You can see we have now services present here. It is taking some time. Let me open this. We have an interface. We have given the, even if you're new here, if you know Core Java, you can understand. If not, just watch why Spring Framework video in this playlist. It will make more sense to you. Then we do have this T-shape skills class, and we do have this Java class. Okay. Let me go back here and save this into our project. And then I would like to go back here. I would like to save the same. Let me do this here also. I would like to go back to my Spring Boot. So basically we have one class called as T-shaped skills. This class is going to use the services, the business logic which is present inside Java class and Spring Boot class. These two classes has some business logic which will be used by T-shaped skills. However, in the T-shaped skills, nowhere I'll take the name of Java and Spring Boot. Nowhere I'll take, and I will be in a position to invoke the methods. Neither inheritance nor the composition. Dependency injection, loose coupling, association is what we have to achieve, as we have watched earlier also. Fine. As a quick recap, let me just tell you, this is a T-shaped class which is going to use the services which are available inside the Java. That means the business logic is present here. I want to use it. There is a business logic present inside this class, and I want to use this business logic inside the T-shaped skills. And in the T-shaped skills, nowhere I am going to use the name of Java nor the Spring Boot. I am going to use the concept of association, polymorphism. So all these service classes, they are implementing iCourse interface. They are implementing the iCourse interface, and as per the concept of polymorphism in Java, using the parent type reference, you can invoke the methods which are there in the child classes. Using the interface type reference, implementing classes overridden method, you can definitely invoke. And that is what I have done it here. If you want more clarity, please do watch the video which is why Spring Framework in this series. However, there are some classes here. Great. I would like to go back to my main method class. Here also I have gone, and I'll not be creating any object here. I'll not create the object of T-shape also. I'll not create the object of Java and Spring Boot also. As you can see here, earlier in our Java application, in my T-shape skills, I have not created the instance of Spring Boot and Java. However, in my main method class, we have created the instance of our target class, dependent object we ourselves have created, and we ourselves manually perform the dependency injection. This time, I don't want this to be created by developer. This also should be taken care by Spring Framework. That means entire object creation in our application, we have Java class, we have Spring Boot class, we have T-shaped skills class. T-shaped skills class is going to use the services which are present inside Spring Boot class, which are present inside the Java class. Fine. Now this is a target class where the services of other classes are being used, and whichever classes service are getting used inside the target class, those are called as dependent object, Java and Spring Boot. Now in my main method class, I'll not be creating any of the objects. I am going to use the concept of inversion of control. That means entire control of object creation, my objects management and dependency injection, I will hand over to Spring Framework. Now Spring Framework will take care of it within its containers. Fine. So what we may have to do here is, we just have to, let me give you quick insight here. This time we are going to use Spring Framework, right? This is our Spring Framework which we are going to use. And inside the Spring Framework, we have IOC. That means we are inverting the entire control of managing our objects and dependency injection to Spring Framework. We are going to activate the container, or you can say IOC container. We are going to give the classes. That means which classes Spring has to manage. And we have to inform Spring through the configuration. One configuration file we have to give. Through this configuration file, we are talking to Spring Framework that look, out of all the classes, which classes it has to create the object, which is the target class, which is the dependent class, which dependency injection should be performed through the constructor or through the setter. All this information through the configuration file, we have to give it to Spring Framework, and then Spring Framework will take care of it. Spring Framework will make it a bean, and Spring Framework will take care of entire dependency injection and the object creation. All the objects creation of your application, Spring only will manage. That means all the objects, all the classes will be managed by Spring Framework. Now, listen to this. Whenever there is a class A, and as a developer, you are creating the object. This is how we create the object, right? And I'll create the reference. This is Java object, or you can say instance. Suppose you're creating the class, but as a developer, you are not creating the object. This object is now created by Spring Framework. You have activated IOC container. You have handed over the entire control of object creation and dependency injection to Spring Framework. On behalf of you, Spring Framework is creating the object. Then we call that as bean. That means a bean. If it is alpha class, alpha bean. So if object is created and managed by Spring Framework, we call that as bean. If you are creating, we call it as object, right? A object or a instance. Instance or object is what you say in core Java. However, if that object is not created by developer, if it is created by the Spring Framework, we call that as a bean. Spring bean. Fine. Now, we do have classes here. You can see here, we have a T-shaped skills class. Great. We have a Spring Boot class. We have a Java class. And in the main method, I don't want to create the object. I want my Spring to create the object. Fine. For which I have to activate the Spring Framework. That means you have to hand over the entire control by activating the Spring Framework. You have to activate Spring IOC container, which will take care of object creation, object management, and dependency injection. For which we do have two containers here. Number one happens to be application context. Number two happens to be bean factory. So we will explore both of that before we get into the Spring Boot. The first one which I would like to discuss here is application context. I'll say here application context type. Maybe I'll say here container, which is IOC container equals to. There are many. This is an interface for which many implementing classes are there. First application I am going to develop with the XML approach, for which I am going to create one instance, new class path XML application context, and within this I have to give the information about the configuration file. I'm going to import. The moment I say import, you can see import org.spring framework. It is not coming from the JDK. It is coming from the Spring Framework. But manually, did we added the library of the Spring Framework? No. We have just asked our Maven, I am dependent on Spring Framework. Could you please add Spring 6 into my application? Maven has added it. You can see all the libraries are present here. Now I can use the classes, interfaces, and everything which is coded by Spring Framework, right? Because the library has been added here. Now it is like you're activating the Spring Framework. You can consider in that way. I have activated the Spring Framework. Now I have to inform my Spring Framework. Hey, look, Spring Framework, you have to do something. What I have to do? That information is present inside. I'll say here application context, or maybe I'll say here application config.xml file. That means there is a file called as application config file, XML file. Inside this file, what Spring has to do, that information is available. Making sense? Now, where is this application config.xml? I have to create. I'll go back to my resources. In my resources, I'll say right click, new. There's an option here, other. I would like to go back here. There is an option to create the XML file, one XML file. Name of the application, XML file. I would like to give it as same as what we have already informed that, which is application config.xml. I'm getting this application. All these code files also will be uploaded in the GitHub repository, or it will be available in the description or comments very soon. It will take a few days of time of the video upload, but everything will be available here. Let me get some meta information about the XML file here. As you can see, I have got this. This you will get it from the official Spring documents or anywhere from the Google also, not a matter of concern. It is the meta information about the XML file, information about this XML file. That's it. Now, within the bean tag, I have to inform my Spring Framework. Look, you have to take care of this object. How I have to inform? You have to use some of the attributes here, which is class. I'll say a class. You have to give the fully qualified names of the classes which you want Spring to manage. So I'll say here class, and fully qualified name. I want my Spring to manage this T-shaped skills. So what is where it is present? It is present inside services package, right? So I'll say here services is the package name. I'll say here dot services dot. What is the name of the class? Name of the class is T-shaped skills. T-shaped skills is the class name. Fine. I want my Spring to manage this. That's the meaning of it. Making sense? And also you can mention the IDs also. That means whenever you create the object, you are going to create a reference variable, right? So you can also decide what should be the reference variable. I'll say here, reference variable, give it as maybe T-shape. TS is a reference variable. If you don't give this, Spring only will create it. So let me just add this within the double quotes. So this also has to be within the double quotes. I would like to specify. Through which you are trying to say, look, Spring Framework, create the instance of this class. That means this class will not be managed by developer. Right now for this class, you have to take care of object creation. When you are creating the object, right, please create the reference variable like this, TS. If you don't give this also, it is fine. Then behind the scene, the ID which will be given by Spring Framework is like this, T-shaped, camel case of the class name, T-shaped skills. The camel case of the class name will be the bean ID if as a developer, if you don't specify explicitly. More on this, we will understand to it, okay? So I've told, please give this as the bean ID. If you want, you can have a self-closing tag also. It should not be a matter of concern. If you want, you can write like this also. Great. Now, whatever you want your Spring, whichever classes you want your Spring to manage, I would like to give here. So maybe I want it to be managed SpringBoot class and also the Java class. Okay. So services dot, the class name which I want Spring to manage is SpringBoot. And here I want it to manage one class which is present inside the services package. Name of the class happens to be the Java class. Great. If you say like this, Spring will take care of object creation of these many classes. There is a better way, easier way using the annotations, using the Spring Boot, which we will explore. This is also one of the way to communicate with Spring Framework. Through this, you are talking to Spring. Hey, look, in my application, I have 3 classes: Spring Boot class, Java class, Spring, T-shaped skills class. These 3 classes as a developer, I am not going to manage. You have to create the object of these classes within your IOC container. Inversion of control, entire control of these objects I am handing over to you. You are the boss of these objects. Fine. Now this is done. And whether it is creating or not, how will I know? I'll go here and create some constructors, because all of you know very well that constructors gets executed whenever you create instance of a object. I would like to go here and say system.out.println. I will say here Java bean created. Bean means what? If the object of this class is created by Spring Framework, then we call it as Java bean. If you are creating, we use the term Java instance, Java object. But right now, as a developer, I'm not going to create this object. This will be created by the Spring Framework. So we call it as Spring Bean, Spring Java Bean. Java is a class name. I'm not talking about general Java, language Java. It's a class name here, okay? So this is fine. I would like to go here and let me just save this to my Spring also. I would like to add it here. I would like to just say here as Spring Boot. And of course, I'll say here Spring Boot Bean. And of course, similarly, I'll go back to my T-shape skills and I'll add one constructor here. We do have already constructor. I would like to just print here. I'll say here T-shape skills being created. Okay. If I'm getting this message, for now, I would like to comment this part. Okay. If I'm getting this message, that means behind the scene, my Spring is creating the objects of this. Great. So please observe here. I have T-shape skills class. I have Spring Boot class. I have my Java class. I'll go back to my main method. Am I creating the Java object anywhere? Am I creating the object of T-shaped skills, Java, Spring Boot class? No. I've just activated my IOC container. I have activated the Spring Framework and told what you have to do, what my Spring Framework have to do. That information is available inside this file, application config.xml. I hope I have given the same name here, application config.xml. Great. Now I would like to run this. Right click, run as Java application. If I run this on your console, are you getting Spring Boot being created, Java being created, T-shaped skills been created. These three messages are present inside the constructors of those classes. If constructors are getting executed, that means beans are getting created, objects are getting created. Right now, as a developer, manually, did I create the object of these classes, or did my Spring framework created the object of these classes? Spring framework created the object of these classes. Even though I'm not using these objects, I have just asked my Spring framework created. This is called as eager initialization. If you go with bean factory instead of the application context, then the objects will not be created unless and until you are going to use it, which practically in the code also you'll understand going forward. But now I have just activated my Spring framework and told what to do. Even though those objects I'm not using, my Spring framework is able to create this. Fine. Now maybe I want to perform the setter injection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to not use this here. I'll use normal bean tag. Great. Within this, if you want to achieve constructor injection, we have one constructor arg tag which you have to use. If you want to go with the setter injection, we have something called as property tag. Property tag. Name where you want to inject. I'll go to my T-shaped skills. T-shaped skills. What is the variable name in the setter, guys? We have given it as course, right? Please inject here. Please inject here. Manual dependency injection through XML. What to inject? I have to inform. That also I have to write a code here, right? Which is, I'll say ref equals to, I want you to inject Java object. I want you to inject Java object. Automatically, will it not perform the dependency injection? It will perform. How we will write that, we will see here. No problem. That means inside whichever class you want to inject the object, no, open the bean tag of that class. Okay. And I have told property, that means setter injection. I want to perform setter injection. Please perform the injection. Inside this setter, inside this variable, inside the T-shaped skills, we do have setter. We do have this, right? Please perform, please inject one object here. Which object to be injected? Java object. I want you to inject this. Okay. Now the setter will be called. If you want, I can just give you a message also here so that you can see system.out.println. I will say setter is called for setter injection. Great. Now I'll go back to my main method class. I want to invoke the business logic which is present inside the T-shaped skills. Inside the T-shaped skills, we have a business logic. I want to call this method from my main method. But the object of T-shaped skills class is already created by Spring framework. How do I get it? I will say here container, IOC container. Could you please help me? What you need? I need bean. Which bean you need? You have to specify either the ID name or you have to specify the type. I want you to give me the bean. Bean means give me object. Which object? You have created one object for this class, T-shaped skills class. For this class, you have created one object. Okay, I have created this object. Give me that. I will collect it here. Maybe with a variable called as T. I'm not creating the object here. I'm asking my IOC container, please give me the object for this class. Why? Because inside this class, there is a business logic method which I want to invoke. I will pass some amount here by the course. I'll say 4.4. Anything is fine. I will say here. Great. Now you are invoking. It will give you the Boolean value, the same as what we have written earlier. If you have watched that video, so you should not have any problem here. It is a contiguous, guys. Okay. If in case status is true. All this, if you know Java, should not be a problem. If the status is true, I'll say here course purchase, one business message, maybe purchased successfully. And if not, failed to purchase the course. Else I'll say here failed to get the course or buy the course. Anything is fine. Great. Now, right now, through the XML configuration, I have informed my Spring framework. Look, you have to create object of these many classes. Great. Spring has created the object of these many classes. Also, I have told my Spring, inject this dependent object, Java object, through setter in my T-shaped skills. That means in my T-shaped skills, my Spring only will perform the dependency injection to this variable. Which object am I injecting? Am I injecting which object? Java object is what I'm injecting. So what will come and sit here? Java will come and sit here. So if I say course.getTheCourse, get the course method of Java class will be invoked. Making sense? Now, in the main method class, there is one business logic method inside this T-shaped skills, right? There is a business logic method. I want to invoke this method from my main class. I'll go back here. I will not create the object. I'll not create the manual object because entire object creation should be handed over to Spring Framework. We are not going to create. Our application is loosely coupled here. So what I have told, look, Spring Framework container, give me one bean. Bean means give me an object for this class which you have already created and kept inside the container. Give me that, which I have collected here. Now I got the object address. Using that address, I'm calling the business logic method. Fine. The rest of the code should not be a matter of concern. If your core Java is clear, if you know polymorphism, interfaces, entire Java, and also if you have watched last 2 videos, and then this video if you're watching, I'm pretty sure you have understood the entire context here. Now I would like to go back to my main and I would like to run this application. If I have to run this application, which you can see here, see, Spring Boot been created, Java been created, T-shaped skills been created. Great. All 3 beans created by Spring Framework. I did not create any object. It is created by Spring. If an object is created by Spring Framework, we call that as a bean. Setter is called. And see here, Java course is purchased. If I'm getting this message, that means Java object is injected inside the T-shaped skills. The dependency injection also happened through the setter. I hope you could able to understand through the XML approach. So this is the application about the Spring Core, very first application using the XML approach. We will develop 2 or 3 more applications using the XML plus annotation approach, and then we shall start the journey of Spring Boot, and you will realize how easy it is to work with Spring Framework using the Spring Boot. Any ambiguity you have in this video, you can rewatch in 1.5x speed with complete focus. Was all the prerequisites which I have highlighted throughout the video, it will make more sense to you. In the last video, we have understood using either application context or bean factory, we can start the Spring Framework. You can activate the Spring IOC container. Application context is what we have used. Going forward, we'll understand on the bean factory as well. Using this class, we have activated the Spring IOC container, and in the application.config file, we have configured, we have specified what my Spring has to do it. If I have to open application.config file, you can see here, I have told Spring, please create a bean of the Spring Boot class, Java class, and T-shaped skills class. If Spring is creating object of these classes, if Spring is managing these objects, then we call them as bean. If as a developer you create the object, we call it as Java object, Java instance. And if this object is created and managed by Spring Framework, Spring IOC container, then we call that as Spring Bean. We have told, please create a bean of Spring Boot, that is object of Spring Boot, Java, and T-shaped skills class. And also we have specified what should be the reference ID of that bean. What is the reference variable of this bean? Usually whenever we create the object for any of the class, we create reference variable, right? What is the name is also we have specified SB for Spring Boot, Java, and T. And also using the property tag, we have specified Spring please perform dependency injection using the setter. That is what I have told. Alongside the property tag, we do also have something called as constructor argument tag. Constructor argument referring to please perform the dependency injection using the constructor, not using the setter. We have discussed in the last video that if you go with the property, it is setter injection. If you go with the constructor arg, it is the constructor injection. So let me just comment this here. If I have to comment this, and let me go to my class, T-shaped skills class. And in the T-shaped skills class, I will just activate this. Great. All right. Let me just uncomment this part. I would like to uncomment this. And I would like to also give one message here. I would like to give one message. System.out.println. I'll say being created. And maybe I'll say here dependency injection. I would like to say here dependency injection through the constructor. Let me add that message here. As you can see, I have added the message dependency injection through the constructor. We do also have a message setter injection through the constructor. However, What did I specify in my application.config file? What information did I give to my Spring framework? I have told, look, please perform the dependency injection using the constructor. If I have to run this application, of course, Java will be injected, but through the constructor. You can see here, if I have to run this, you can see dependency injection through constructor. That is, constructor injection is what happening here. Fine. And whenever you want to perform the dependency injection through the setter, we have a property tag. Whenever you want to perform dependency injection through the constructor, we have constructor tag, right? Now, do we have any other option? The answer is yes. This is manual dependency injection. Manually, you are specifying Spring framework that, look, perform the dependency injection using the setter. Inject Java object to this variable which is present in the setter, present inside the T-shape skills. That is, in the T-shape skills class, we do have a setter available. Inside the setter, we do have this reference variable of type iCourse. To this reference variable, please inject this Java object through constructor or through setter. If it is constructor arg tag. If it is setter, we specify property tag. Now I want auto wiring. I want automatic dependency injection. This is manual wiring. You are connecting two classes manually. You are specifying inject Java object through the setter to this variable which is available inside this. There is a variable here of iCourse type. Through the setter, please inject Java object. Manually, you are wiring, connecting two classes, connecting two object. I don't want to do that. I want to go with auto wiring, automatic dependency injection, automatic connection of two objects here. So for which we do have some attributes. I want to perform dependency injection. I want my Spring to inject a dependent object in my T-shape skills class, because as we have discussed earlier, T-shape skills is a target object. Java and Spring Boot is a dependent object. That is, inside T-shape skills, you are using services of Spring Boot and Java. So here I'm going to add one attribute called as auto wire. And you can see we have by name, by type, constructor or no. I'll go with by type. I have told here, I have not told property tag or constructor. I have not told whether it is a setter injection or constructor injection. I have told auto wire. Automatically perform the dependency injection by type here. So if I have to open this T-shaped skills, so we do have iCourse type course reference, which is accepting in your constructor also, in your setter also, both the places iCourse type. Now, how many classes, how many objects are there right now which are of type iCourse? We have two things. One is Java, because Java is also implementing iCourse interface, and Spring Boot is also implementing iCourse interface. So there are two classes which are of type iCourse. That means to this particular reference variable, we can inject two objects. Java object also we can inject, Spring Boot also we can inject, because both of them are of type iCourse only. Now, if I have to go to my application.xml, I have not told whether it is a setter or constructor injection. I have told, please perform dependency injection automatically by type. Now, by type means both of them are eligible, because this is also of type iCourse. Java is also of iCourse, because Java is also implementing iCourse and Spring Boot is also implementing iCourse. So both two objects are eligible here. Which object my Spring will inject is what we may have to see here. I'll go here. I will say right click, run as Spring Boot or Java application. And you can see we have got an exception. No unique bean exception. No qualifying being of type service iCourse available. Expected single matching but found to SB and Java. There are two objects which are eligible for this iCourse. There are two objects eligible for this. Which should I inject? My Spring is confused now. Look at the beautiful message. By using the Spring framework, we are calling ourselves a developer. The one who have developed these beautiful frameworks, they are the real developer. Look at the beautiful message they have given. No qualifying being of type this. We are expecting one, but there are two. That is, this is also eligible to be injected. Java is also eligible to be injected, because iCourse, there are two types, Spring Boot and Java. both of the classes are implementing iCourse interface. That means both of them are type iCourse. Now, which should I inject? Should I inject Spring Boot or Java? I don't know that. I'm confused. I cannot do favoritism. I cannot pick any one and randomly perform the dependency injection. You have told automatically inject the object by type, whichever is of type iCourse. What I found out is there are two classes which are of type iCourse. Java also, Spring Boot also. Now, which I have to inject, I'm not sure on that. Which I have to inject, I'm not sure on that. Now, for which, that is the reason we have got here exception. I'll go and say here, maybe I want to inject this Spring Boot. I'll say here primary equals to, I would like to go here true. That means please inject Spring Boot. You have to give primary focus on this Spring Boot. Now there will not be any ambiguity. I would like to save this and I would like to go and run my application. If I run, you can see Spring Boot course is purchased. That means Spring Boot object is injected. And one more beauty I want you to focus here is I have not specified that it has to perform the dependency injection through the setter or through the constructor. Now, which is by default Spring is using, it is setter. Setter is called for setter injection. I hope you're able to. I have not specified. I have not used any property tag, constructor tag. I have told automatically perform the dependency injection by type. Whichever is of type iCourse, please inject. Earlier, Spring was confused because there were two beans eligible for iCourse, Java also, Spring Boot bean also, because both of them are of type iCourse. Then I have clarified, removed the confusion, ambiguity for the Spring. I have told primary true. That means please inject the Spring Boot object, Spring Boot object automatically here to my T-shape skills. I have specified here by using the primary attribute. Now there is no ambiguity. The more interesting part here is I have not told whether it has to follow the constructor injection or the setter injection. I have told just perform the dependency injection automatically, and you can see we have got setter. That means internally behind the scene Spring is using setter injection. Now, like the way we have this by type, let me just take this once again. I would like to just comment this off and I would like to go here, and we also do have equals to constructor. That means I'm telling please perform the dependency injection automatically by the constructor, right? So now if I have to save this, I would like to go here, right click, run as Java application. You can see constructor will be invoked. Dependency injection through the constructor. I have told please perform dependency injection through the constructor. Making sense? Now, suppose I would like to go back here. Let me just comment this, and I don't want to comment this part. I would like to uncomment this and I will comment this part. Maybe I'll comment this entire part. Now, I have not told my Spring to even create the bean of Spring Boot. I have told Spring, please create a bean of Java. Please create a bean of T-shape. Now I'm telling please perform dependency injection automatically by type. For my Spring framework, is there any ambiguity? No, there is no ambiguity because we have only one bean, Java bean available with the Spring IOC container. Spring IOC container has not even created the Spring Boot bean. It is not even there. I have not told, right? I have commented this. It is not a part of my code now. I have told create a bean of Java class. Spring has created it. Create a bean of T-shapes class. Spring framework has created it. Also, I've told perform the dependency injection automatically, whichever is of type iCourse. Now, right now, only one Java object is available, which is of type iCourse. Why? Spring Boot class is there, right? Yeah, it is there. But in the configuration class, I have not specified. I have not told my Spring framework that you have to create a bean of the Spring Boot. I have commented this part. So right now Spring will create bean of only Java. So in the Spring IOC container, only Java object is available. We don't have Spring Boot object. So there is no confusion at the time of dependency injection. Right now in the Spring IOC container, there is only one bean which is eligible, which is of type iCourse. So only one bean is there. There is no ambiguity. Spring will perform the dependency injection of Java to this through the setter. If you have not specified anything, by default, Spring use setter. It is also a message that setter injection is always preferred over the constructor or the field injection. If I have to run this, you can see no ambiguity here. I have not used primary or anything because Spring IOC container has only one Java bean, which is of type iCourse, which Spring easily can perform the dependency injection inside this T-shape skills automatically using the setter. You can see here, setter is called for the setter injection. I hope you could able to understand. If you have watched all the videos from the beginning, overview of the Spring Framework, why Spring Framework, where we have talked about dependency injection using the Java application, and also Spring Framework overview, the very first video of the Spring Core, and this happens to be the next video of the Spring Core. If you have watched all those videos, you will not face any issue to understand this. Any ambiguity if you have, you can always rewatch this video. Thank you so much for joining me in this video. We'll meet again in the next video. As we have understood earlier that there are two ways to start the Spring Framework or to activate the Spring Framework or Spring IOC container. Number one, by using the implementing classes of application context, that is what we have done. Also, we have an option to use the classes from the family of Bean Factory. Bean Factory and application context are the interfaces. We have many implementations there. So whatever applications we have developed so far, we have used application context. In this video, we will try to use Bean Factory and understand the difference between application context and Bean Factory. Also in the process, you'll understand what do we mean by eager initialization and lazy initialization. Fine. So what I'll be doing here is I would like to create one more main method class here just to show the difference, what exactly the difference between these two. Let it be launch application number 2. Great. And we do have one more main method class available. And I'll not be using application context here. I'll be using the classes from the family of Bean Factory. We have some classes which we can use here. Number one happens to be new default listable Bean Factory is the class name. Let me create the instance of it. As you can see, I have created the instance of default listable Bean Factory. Unlike in the application context, whatever implementing classes you're using, in the constructor you had specified what is the configuration file, where is the information for the Spring Framework to do some task. So here in the constructor, you're not going to specify. You may have to use some of the methods, for which I would like to create one more instance, which is XML Bean definition reader. So let me create that instance here, and this container I will attach to this particular instance, and then using some of the methods, we have to load application.configuration file. The way we have to activate this IOC container is different than how we have done in the application context here. Fine. So let me create the instance of that also here. As you can see, I have created the instance of XML Bean definition reader, and also within this instance, I have passed the container which we are using, which is Bean Factory. Now what I'm going to do here is I will say here read dot load. There are many methods here. Load Bean definition. You have to specify the exact what is the application, what is the name of the configuration file, like the way we have done here with the help of constructor. So this is the application.configuration file which I have to load. So I'm going to say here Spring, you have activated, you have to do some task. What is the task I have to do? That information is available within this configuration file, and this is how we have to inform. So the way we have to activate the Spring IOC container using the application.context is different than Bean Factory. In the Bean Factory, we have to use one instance called as default listable Bean Factory, and then we have to read that configuration file using some of the methods here. Also going forward, you'll understand this is not the only class which is there in the application context. We are going to use more of an application context itself. So for the Java configuration, it is different. For the annotation configuration, it is different. Right now, we are going with the XML configuration. So only the class name is class path XML application context. It will be different for Java and annotation, what we will see in the future videos, right? So right now I do have this. Right now, to activate the Spring Framework, this time I'm going to use the Bean Factory IOC container, not the application context here. So what I'm going to do here is I will comment this part. I'm not going to use any of the beans. I'll go back to my application.configuration file. And dependency injection also I would not like to perform. I just want my Spring to create a beans. I have commented this. No setter injection, no constructor injection, no automatic setter constructor injection, nothing. I have just asked my Spring create the beans of these many classes. Great. I would like to go back here, and I don't want to use that. I'm not asking my Spring to give me that bean. I have to call some method, nothing as such. I would like to comment this. I want you to observe this. I have commented this part also. Now I'm going to run this application which is using application context. I would like to go to the application, right click. I'll say here run as Java or Spring Boot application. If I run this, you can see Spring Boot bean is created, Java bean is created, T-shaped skills bean is created. Even though I'm not using any of this bean, based on the information which is available in application configuration XML file, it is creating the beans. Even though I'm not using any beans for the constructor or setter injection, or in any way I'm not invoking this method. No, I'm not asking my Spring to give me the bean. The moment I have specified that what bean Spring has to take care, if you run the application which has application context, it is creating the bean. This is referred as eager initialization. Even though you are not using any of the beans which Spring is creating, Spring will still create the bean, whether you are using or you are not using. Coming to the bean factory family, I do have this application, right? And I would like to run this application right now. I'll go here, right click, run as Java or Spring Boot application. You can see you have not got any message here. You have not got any message. Here we call this as lazy initialization. Unless and until you are going to use any of the beans, Spring will not create the bean. Right now in this application also I'm not using any of the beans, but Spring is still creating it. Eager initialization. That is, whether you use those beans or not doesn't matter. I'll keep it ready in my container. If you go with bean factory, if you are going to use, only then I will create. If not, I will not create the beans. For an instance, what I'm going to do right now is I'll go back to application.config, and I would like to uncomment this. Maybe I would like to go for the setter injection here. Great. And I would like to go back here. I'm asking my Spring, please give me bean. That means get me a bean which is there by this name. That means you are going to use the bean. So now if I have to run this, right click, run as Spring application or Java application. You can see here T-shaped skills bean is created, Java bean is created, setter is called, setter injection, through the setter injection everything is executed. That means these beans are getting created whenever you are asking, whenever you are going to use it. If you don't use, it is not creating any bean. Right now I've told IOC container, which is bean factory this time, could you please give me a bean of T-shaped skills? Since you are using T-shaped skills bean, that time my Spring IOC container will create the instance of this. And since you are performing the dependency injection of a Java, so Java bean is creating. See here, there is no Spring Boot bean also here. Making sense here? Now, same goes here. I would like to go back to my application number 1 where application context is being used. I would like to go here. I would like to uncomment this. Okay. I have uncommented. Now let me run this application context application. That means such a Java application where application context IOC container is being used. If I have to run this, and you can notice here, we are getting Spring Boot bean is also created. Now in this case, why Spring Boot bean created message you are not getting? Because that bean is not being used. You have asked to give the T-shaped skill, so that bean is created, and you're performing dependency injection of Java object. That means Java bean is getting used. So only Java bean got created here. If I have to run this again, right click, run as, you can see Spring Boot bean is not yet created because that is not getting used. Fine. So the conclusion here is, if you go with application.context, whether you're going to use that bean or not doesn't matter. Spring will create the beans of all the beans which you have specified in application context or application configuration file. All the beans based on this information, Spring framework will create in IOC container and keep it ready. Whether these beans, these objects you're using or you're not using doesn't matter. But if you go with bean factory, in that case, it will create the bean only if you're using. Example, I have told my Spring, give me that bean. That means T-shaped skills bean, T-shaped skills object you're going to use. Since you're using, that time my Spring IOC container will create a bean of it, right? Since I'm injecting the Java object, that means Java bean I'm using. That time my Spring IOC container will create the Java. And since in the entire application, Spring Boot bean I'm not using anywhere, you have not got the message that no Spring Boot bean created here. So this, if you go with the bean factory, it supports the lazy initialization. If you go with the application context, it supports the eager initialization. And one more difference is that you can see here, application context, you're loading the XML file through the constructor. If you want one more configuration file to be loaded, then you have to create one more object of this. That means one more new IOC container you have to create. If you want to load 4 maybe configuration file, 4 times you have to create 4 IOC separate containers you have to create. That is not the case with respect to bean factory, because we are using the method here. Example, I have one more configuration file here. I would like to just reuse this. Okay, maybe configuration 2. For an example, 2 configuration files are there. See, I'm creating the instance of bean factory only one. There is only one IOC container. And what I can do here is, I'll say here, read dot load. Okay, let me just reuse the same code here. I will reuse, and I'm just asking, all right, let me just use this one once again. Let me use it, and I would like to add it, and I'll say here application configuration 2. That's the name of configuration file here, right? So by using this one IOC container, you can load multiple configuration files, multiple XML files. But if you go with the application context, only one per one IOC container, because this is getting loaded at the time of creation of this IOC container. So if you want more configuration file, then you have to create more IOC containers. Per IOC container, one configuration file. Here, per IOC container, you can load multiple configuration file. Application context supports eager initialization. That means whether you are using the beans or not, based on the information, it will create the beans of all the classes you have mentioned, and it will keep it ready. Whether you are using that or not, it's not a matter of concern. But if you go with the bean factory, if you are using the bean, it will create the instance. If you are going to use that object, only then the bean will be created. Bean means it's object only. Since Spring is going to create the object, we refer as bean. Creating the bean means creating the object here. I hope you could able to understand, provided if you have watched all the videos which are there in this playlist, which are there in this series. Starting till last, if you have understood, I hope you will not face any issue to understand this particular video also. Also provided you know the core Java properly. Fine. So far we have developed the applications with Spring Framework using XML. That means XML approach is what we have followed. It's time to understand annotation approach, which is the most popular. From now on, all the upcoming videos and everything we need to learn with the annotation approach itself. Now suppose we have a class, any class it could be. I have one class here, alpha, and I want this class to be managed by Spring IOC container. I want this to be managed by Spring Framework. Usually what we have seen so far is we have to use one bean tag in the XML approach. Right now, we are not going to use XML approach. We are going to follow the annotation approach, for which I have to inform my Spring Framework that look, this particular class has to be managed by you. That means the life cycle of this class, this object should be managed by Spring Framework. How do we have to tell? We have to just add one annotation here at the top of class, which is nothing but component. This is one of the stereotype annotation, a base of a general purpose stereotype annotation, which is base of all other stereotype annotation. If you just attach one annotation at the top of this class, Spring will understand that it has to take care of this particular class. Spring will create the bean of that particular class and manage the entire life cycle of that particular bean or that particular object here. Like component, we have many other stereotype annotations which comes based on the layers of the application. What do you mean by that? Usually in industry, to develop the application in the backend, we follow the layered approach development. In the backend, the application will be divided into 3 major layers. One we call it as web layer. One is the business layer or the service layer. The other is repository layer, persistence layer, or DAO layer. All of them are referring to same. So this happens to be the web layer, and this is the business layer, or you can say the service layer. The actual purpose of the application will be written here. And finally, we will have the repository layer, or you can say DAO layer or persistence layer. Now, in this layer, we will be writing the code which is responsible to interact with the database. Suppose every application at the end of the day, it has to be connected to the database, right? So in the database, within the database, we'll be storing the records. It could be SQL database, no SQL database. Database means it is a storage place where data will be stored permanently. Permanent storage of your data unless and until you delete that. So all the code which is responsible to interact with the database, to store the data, update the data, insert the data, or retrieve the data, whatever it could be the operation, all the database related, DB related code which we write, we have to write within the repository layer, persistence layer, DAO layer. All of them are referring to same here. Now, actual purpose of the application, for what purpose you have developed the application, the main business logic of your application, the actual business logic of your application will be written within the service layer. Web layer means it is responsible, whatever code we write here, it is responsible to handle the request coming over HTTP protocol. HTTP protocol, if there is any request, that means that is a web request. If your application is a web application, which will work only if there is internet connection. It could be your university website or any web application you might have used, which will work only if there is internet working, only if there is a internet connection in your device. So all the responsible code which will take the request which is coming over the web and to response back, that code will be writing here. And a classes which we write here, which is actually handling the code which is responsible to take the HTTP request and the response. Those classes usually we use some annotation called as controller, or you can say REST controller. What is the difference between controller, REST controller? In detail going forward in this entire series we will try to understand. Here we are going to use the annotation such as service, and here a code, a class wherein you have written the code, JDBC code, Hibernate code, or Spring Data API code. Such a code which is responsible to perform DB operation. If you want to perform, get connected to the database, and if you want to insert some data, update some data, delete some data, all the code which you write within a class, that class usually we use one annotation called as repository. If there is any configurations inside the class, we use one annotation called as configuration. Now, what you need to understand is whenever we write our classes, and if we want that classes objects to be created by the Spring framework, that means if object is created and managed by Spring framework, we call that object as a bean. Example, if this class object is created by Spring framework, we say alpha bean. Bean means that means it is being managed by the Spring framework. Now usually in the XML approach we used to say that please create the object or manage this particular class by using one tag called as bean tag. Right now we are following annotation approach. In the annotation approach no XML comes into picture. How do we inform Spring framework that they have to take care of such classes? By using component annotation. Like component annotation, we have multiple other annotations which comes under the category of stereotype annotation. Stereotype annotation means all annotations which you will be applying at the class level to inform Spring framework to manage that particular class object. That means to manage this particular beans here. Now, before I discuss those stereotype annotation, I have just told in industry we follow layered approach development, wherein we divide our application into multiple layers. All the logic which is responsible to handle the request, HTTP request, and to response, we write within the web layer. The actual purpose of application we write within the service layer or the business layer. And all the code which is responsible to connect to the database, JDBC code, Hibernate code, Spring Data API code, we will be writing inside the persistence layer or repository layer or DAO layer. Fine. Now, the important stereotype annotation which you need to understand here is, let me just write down here, which is component, controller, REST controller, configuration, service, and repository. If I have to write the list of this, as you can see, I have listed all those annotations. So base of all other stereotype annotation is component itself. And what is the logic of component? As I have told, if you attach component to the class, it is information to the Spring framework that it has to take care of this particular class. That means it has to manage this bean. It has to create the bean and manage the life cycle of that particular bean. So whenever you are writing such a logic which has the web logic, that means such a class which has the web logic, a logic which is responsible to handle the HTTP request and the response back to the client over the web. Such logic, such classes we write controller or REST controller. When it comes to the REST APIs, it is REST controller. What is the difference between controller and REST controller? We will understand going forward in depth. But for now, if you have any class and if you write at the top of the class controller or the rest controller, that means it is component, the behavior of component annotation will remain same. That means Spring will manage that particular object. Alongside that, it is also an information that in this particular class there is a web logic present. So if there is a class wherein you have a business logic present, the actual purpose of the application we have coded inside that class, then that class must be annotated with service. Service means it is business logic, and also the behavior of the component annotation will remain as it is. That means if you apply service to a class, that class bean also will be created by Spring IOC container, because it is component plus business logic. It is a message to a developer also. By looking at the class, if you see annotation service at the top of the class, oh, there is some business logic present inside this class, that will give you a message. And also it will internally use component. That means Spring will manage the particular bean of that class. So configuration also can be applied to a class, which is the behavior of component annotation will remain same, plus it is a message that inside this class configuration, some configuration code has been written. Fine. So when it comes to the repository annotation also, you can apply to a class. If you apply to a class, Spring will create a bean of this. That will be a part of Spring bean lifecycle. The behavior of component annotation will remain as it is, plus it is a message that inside this class database JDBC code, Hibernate code, or maybe some code which is responsible to perform the DB operation is present. Fine. So these are the stereotype annotation very often in the Spring you will use. Alongside that, we do have auto void, qualifier, primary, bean annotation, which going forward in this entire series you will understand one by one. Fine. So let me just open the IDE and try to demonstrate what I have discussed so far. Now you can see here we do have the XML approach. In XML, I'll not be writing any beans and all. So far we have written this, so I'll be removing this, I'll be deleting this, because we are not following the XML approach. We do have XML file, but can we completely remove the XML file? If that is your question, the answer is yes, that is also possible. Very next example and upcoming all the examples, we will use zero XML. This is the last application where you might see me using the XML approach. However, in this XML approach, I'm just informing my Spring framework that I'm going to use annotation approach. I will not be informing you what to do by using the property tag or constructor arg tag or the bean tag. I'll not be using that. I will just inform my Spring saying that I'm going to follow, you can see here, context annotation config. That means I'm following this time annotation approach. That is the information I'm giving here. Please go and find. You can find the information what you have to do in those classes itself. I'm going to follow the annotation approach. You can write like this also, and you can write the self-closing tag also. Both of them are fine. I would like to write the self-closing tag. There is no problem. Alongside that, we may have to also inform the context component scan. This is very, very important. That means I'm informing my Spring framework that you have to consider all the classes which are part of this package. Example, I am starting the packages, multiple packages I have already created here for different layers, configuration layer, repository, service, and web layer, just to demonstrate one basic application. com.tshape. So I will say here all the classes which comes under com.tshape, only those classes you may have to take care. Example, if I have to create one more package which is starting from in.tshape, or some other package which is not starting from com.tshape, and those classes Spring will not even scan. Spring will not even check for that. It will not even consider. About that also at the end maybe we will try to discuss. So I'm trying to say here, as Spring, I'm following the annotation approach. You will find what to do inside those classes itself. However, consider such a classes which are part of this package. This is the base package. Don't consider any classes which are not from this package. So if you write one more package, let me just write here. Let me create a new package here, new. I would like to say here package, and the package I would like to start with in.tshape or anything else. Right? So if I write some code here, that code will not be considered by the Spring framework. It will consider only such a code which are part of these packages. That's the meaning of this. So through this XML approach, I'm just informing my Spring framework that I'm following the annotation approach. That's it. And moving forward, we will have zero dependency on XML. I will not even use this XML file also to inform the Spring. How that will work, we will see to it. Fine. So now let me just, Go and create some classes here. I will create one class here. I'll create all the classes in all the layers. Okay, so let me write one class here called as a repository class. I will not be writing the actual DB logic here. I will just write some basic class just to inform that different annotation, all of them, the base annotation is component itself. Fine. So likewise, let me create all the classes in different packages. As you can see, I have created classes in all the packages based on the layered approach which I have explained to you. I have created one package called com.tshape.config where I have written one class here. Right now, actual configurations I have not written here. I have just written one constructor because you know very well, whenever you create the instance, constructor will get executed. So if we are getting this message, that means this constructor, that means this object is getting created, that means the bean is getting created. Fine. So now you can see same thing I have done in the different layers also. Service, actual business logic I have not written. I'm just trying to demonstrate that multiple layers are there. Great. Now as I have discussed, I have to apply the stereotype annotation on top of these classes. Here web logic, right? Web logic means it is component plus the web logic. What is the suitable annotation? Controller or REST controller. I would like to use here controller, right? I would like to show a service. Service means which annotation we have to use, as we have discussed. Component plus business logic means we have to use service. All this stereotype annotation based on the different layers, you have to use different annotation. All of the annotation, the base is component. If the base is component, all these annotations, if you apply to a class, Spring will take care of bean creation. Spring will manage the entire bean of that particular class. So I would like to go here and say repository. Any ambiguity you can rewatch from the scratch. You can watch it in 1.5x speed also. I would like to go here and here I'll apply the annotation called as configuration. Great. And also I will write one supporting class, utility class. Maybe I would like to write that utility class within the service layer. Whatever utility class you want, you can write just to demonstrate. I'll say here alpha class, some supporting class. Okay, and within this I would like to write one constructor here, and within the, so that if a bean is getting created or not, how will I know? How will I get to know? If constructor is getting executed, that means bean is getting created. If you know the core Java properly, I would like to just say system.out.println here. I will say here alpha bean created. There is no specialty of this particular class. I will use the base annotation, which is component. So basically what I'm trying to say is, if you apply component to the class, at the top of this class, it is a message to the Spring framework. It has to take care of bean. However, in place of component, why are you writing controller, service, configuration, repository? All of these annotation behind the scene, the base is component. They are component plus some special feature. Component plus a message to a developer that inside this class, a logic which is responsible to connect to the database is present. That's the meaning of it. Now I'll go to my main class. In the main class, I have loaded the configuration file. And in the configuration file, what did I say? Please consider all the classes which comes under this package. And I'm following the annotation approach. Now Spring will go to those classes and will create the beans. Let me right click here, run as the Java application, and you can see config bean created, repository bean created, alpha bean created, service logic bean created, web logic. Whether I have used configuration annotation, right? Whether I have used service annotation, whether I have used controller annotation, whether I have used component or the repository, irrespective of this annotation I have created, is my Spring able to create a bean of that particular class? The answer is yes, right? The object is getting created by the Spring IOC container. All these annotations comes under the stereotype annotation. The basic purpose is same. If you apply to the top of this class, the basic purpose is Spring will take care of object creation, bean creation of this particular class. Also, it is a message to a developer that what type of logic is present inside that particular class. If you see repository, one thing is sure that this will be managed by Spring. Spring will create a bean of this, Spring will manage it. One more message that inside this class, a logic which is responsible to connect to the database, that logic is present. I hope you are able to understand here. Now, similar to that, we have a bean annotation, which is not the annotation which doesn't come under the family of stereotype annotation. What is the use of this is what you need to understand here. I would like to maybe create one class called as password class. I would like to create one password class. Great. And let me create one constructor of this. Let me create one constructor. I would like to go here and write one constructor public, and I would like to just go here and say system.out.println. I will say here password been created. Great, that's fine. Now I would like to accept string type of some algorithm. String type of algorithm. Yes, some algorithm, algo name. Okay, great. Some algorithm is there. That's fine. And also I will be writing one method here. Let me write any method in that maybe string type of some method, some business logic method. I will say here something about algo. Just to demonstrate one example here. Okay, I will say system.out.println. I will say here algorithm used is. I would like to just return that algo which I am receiving here. Great. And I'm not just printing. Let me do one thing here. I will just return this instead of me printing it. I will just return this. Okay, that will make more sense. Great. I would like to just save. I would like to go here. I will say here string type of algo, and within this, as you all know very well in Java, this dot algo equals to algorithm. Okay, great. Now, did I apply any of the annotation at the top of this class? Component or configurations or repository or DAO or service? No, I have not applied any of the annotation here. That means Spring will not take care of it. Maybe sometimes the requirement is as a developer, you might have to create the object. I'll go to my configuration class. Let me open the configuration class and I will write the method here public. Return type of the method is password. I'll say here create password bean. Okay. Within this, what I'm going to do here is I will say here return new password. That means as a developer, I am hard coding the password object here. I will pass some algorithm. Maybe SH is the algorithm which I am passing here. Fine. I would like to import this. And at the top of this, you can see here, this is the object creation part. Now this object is created by developer. If developer is creating the object, will it be part of Spring IOC container? The answer is no. I will save this. I'll go back to my main method class. If you are listening with complete focus, you will be in a position to understand. I will go back here and say container dot get bean. I will say here get bean and I will say password dot class. All right. And I will just get it here pass. Okay. I would like to get this. Great. Now, if I have to just run this application, I will say here password dot. I will say about algorithm. I'm calling this method. Please understand this very carefully. I would like to go back here and run this application. Main method I will go and run this application. I will say here run as, okay, I have to write one semicolon here. It should not be any compile time error. Let me just rerun this application. All right. I would like to just go and run this application. See, I'm getting an error. No such bean definition. There is no definition by the name password. Why? Did I apply any of the annotation at the top of this? No. That means it is not a part of Spring Bean lifecycle. This bean is not created by Spring. You can see in the configuration class as a developer, I am hard coding the object. This object is created by developer, not by the Spring IOC container, not inside the Spring IOC container. Now, sometimes the requirement is you might have to create the bean, but you want your Spring to consider as a part of Spring IOC container. You want that look Spring, I have created the object, but I want you to consider as a Spring bean. Please manage within IOC container. Please take it into the family of Spring Bean lifecycle. Please get it with yourself. So how to inform that? By using an annotation called as bean. So whenever you create the object manually, the object is not created by Spring Framework. You as a developer have to create the object and Spring will manage that internally. You are requesting Spring that I have created the object, but I want you to manage, consider as a bean. Spring will consider anything as a bean only if Spring is creating the object. For example, you can see here, this I have used service. That means Spring will create the object of this class. If Spring is creating object of this class, that means that is a bean, correct? But this time here, this object is created by developer, not the Spring Framework. If you are creating the, object here, this will not be considered as a bean. It will be considered as a bean only if Spring is creating the object. Spring is creating the bean, not the developer. Sometimes the requirement might be that you are creating the object, but you want Spring to consider as a bean. It's a request that I have created the object. There was some need, but I want you to consider as a bean. It is a request that please consider this as a bean. I have created the object, but I want you to consider as a bean and manage as a bean lifecycle. So let me just go and run this. There will be no problem here. And use case of the bean annotation, we are going to see much going forward in our applications, in our classes. I hope you are able to understand this. These are the stereotype annotation which you use very often. Fine. So thank you so much for joining me in this video. And also one point I would like to highlight now itself, okay, in this particular video itself, that like the way we used to give bean ID, right? Here I have not specified. As I have told you, whatever is the camel case of this classes, that will be the default bean ID. In the XML approach, I have told using the ID attribute you had specified. In the annotation approach, if you want, you can specify like this. I want the bean ID to be AL. If you don't give the bean ID, behind the scene, the camel case of this class will be the bean ID, default bean ID. Example, I will save this. I might have not given the bean ID here. I have not specified what should be the bean ID. So the default bean ID behind the scene will be like this. Camel case of this class name. The camel case of this class name is service logic. See, that will be the bean ID. If you want, you can give. Maybe the bean ID I will give here as service. SERV. So this will be the bean ID. This will not be the bean ID now. If you want, you can specify within the annotation. If you don't specify, in that case, by default, the bean ID will be the camel case of the class name. See, some cases I have not specified and some cases I have specified. That is totally subjective. Fine. In the next video, we need to understand the Java configuration. I'll not be using the XML, zero XML, same application with just the Java configuration. Now let's develop one more application using the Spring framework with annotation approach, however, without any XML. In the last application, we have used the annotations, but with some XML. We have written some XML through which we have informed the Spring framework to scan all the classes which comes under this package. Also, we have informed that this time we are following the annotation approach. Please consider all the stereotype annotations which are applied to these classes. Based on this, Spring could able to create the beans. That is what we have understood. So in this application, we are going to configure the Spring framework with pure Java code, no XML at all. So what I'll be doing is, I will delete this application config.xml file. You can see I have deleted. There is no XML file. I'll go to my configuration. Within the configuration, I am going to inform one more annotation here called as component scan annotation. Within this, one attribute we have which is base packages. That's the name of the attribute, equals to. I would like to just specify what is the package. I'll say here com dot the t-shaped, the package which we have seen in the last application also, com.t-shaped. Okay, this is the package. I would like to import it. Great. I have imported, I have saved. I'll go back to my main class, and here this time we are not following the XML approach. So this class I'm not going to use. Class path XML application context. We are closing the chapter of XML. Now for which we do have something called as annotation config application, annotation config application context, that we are following annotation approach. And here I will just inform the class where the component scanning is available. That class information I'll give here. The class name which we have is config, right? So I'll say here config.java. So whatever basic information you need, that is available inside this class. That's the meaning of it. Fine. So this time we are not following XML approach. The same application which we have developed in the last video, we are going to develop here. You can see I am going to follow. Of course, it is not .java. My bad, it is .class. Great. I would like to save this. So like the way in the last, I have used the stereotype annotation. If you apply configuration is a base is component annotation plus extra message that inside this class some configurations are there. And coming to here, it is component plus a repository. That means we have here a database, JDBC logic. That's the meaning of it. So if you apply any of these stereotype annotation, the commonality is Spring will create beans of all these classes, whether it is a repository, whether it is a configuration, whether it is a service, whether it is a controller. That's the commonality here. I would like to save this, and you can see there is 0 and no XML here. I would like to go and run my application. You can see the same output as we have got in our previous video. You can see we got the same result here, but without any XML. Now, as we have discussed, as I have told you in the last class, in the configuration, also in the XML, we have discussed component scanning. The base package I have told com.telescope. That means I have informed Spring to consider the classes which are part of com.telescope. If you have in.telescope, I'll go and create one class here. It could be any class. Example class, maybe I'll say here beta. Great. And let me just create one constructor here. I would like to go here. I will say public, and I will create one constructor. Within this, I will say system.out.println. I will say here beta being created. I would like to save this, and I am going to apply one of these stereotype annotation. I would like to go with component. As you all know, if you say component, Spring will create the bean of this. So let me just create here the annotation name as component. Once again, component. I would like to import this. It is imported. So if you apply any of these annotations, Spring will create bean of this class, right? However, this time you will not see beta being created. If I have to run this application again, right click, run as Java application or Spring application, you can see you have all other beans, but not the beta bean. Though component, if you apply, usually Spring should create a bean of that class. Right now, Spring is not creating bean of this class. Why? Because this class is present inside a package called as in.tshaped. And what did I say here inside the config? I have told, look, please consider the classes which are part of this com.telescope. I hope so. Spring will scan all the classes which are part of this package, not the class which is there in.tshape. That's the use case of component scan. Same goes with the XML approach also. So this is the last application without Spring Boot. Going forward, all our application will be with the Spring Boot. So far, we have tried to understand the core of Spring framework, which is Spring Core, inversion of control, dependency injection with XML approach, annotation approach with Java configuration, XML configuration. Now it's time to get into the Spring Boot, and the remaining part of the Spring Core we have to understand with the Spring Boot. And you will see how easy it is to work with Spring Framework if you go with Spring Boot. Also, by default, you'll understand the difference between Spring Framework and Spring Boot. Spring Boot is not a new framework. Spring Boot is Spring Framework plus auto configuration. That means easier way to work with Spring Framework. Fine. So far, we have developed the applications with the Spring Framework without using Spring Boot. That means we have followed the XML approach, annotation approach, Java configuration, and the annotation approach. Now it's time to develop the application with the Spring Boot. Some of the advantages like auto configuration you will see in this application itself. But however, moving forward, Spring Boot is more than just the auto configuration. It supports the embedded Tomcat server, in-memory database like H2, and also we have facility of actuators. More by default, as and when we progress in this entire series, you will understand. Now, in order to create the Spring Boot project, most of the IDEs supports. If you are going with the IntelliJ IDEA, then the paid IntelliJ IDEA, the ultimate version, directly from the IDE itself, you can create the Spring Boot application. If you are using the Spring Tool Suite, one of the IDE for the Spring application, 95% of Spring Tool Suite is same as Eclipse. If you are already comfortable with Eclipse, even if you use Spring Tool Suite, you will not face any issue. Directly from the IDE itself, you can create the Spring Boot project. And if you have integrated, if you have added the plugin of Spring Tool Suite into your Eclipse, in that case, from the Eclipse also directly you can create the Spring Boot application. However, if you have not added, right, like the way I have not added the Spring Tool Suite in this Eclipse IDE, so I cannot create directly from the IDE itself. Now, if you want to create a Spring Boot approach in a universal way, irrespective of the IDEs, you are not dependent on the IDEs, then you have to open one of the website. You have to just search here Spring.io initializer, and the very first website you can see here, start.spring.io. Within this, you can create one Spring Boot application. Doesn't matter which IDE you use. This is one of the universal approach to develop or create the Spring Boot application. I want to develop a Maven project. You need not to separately create, I need a Maven project or Gradle project. At the time of developing or creating a Spring Boot application, here itself you can specify which build tool you want to use. I want to go with the Maven. and I want to use the latest Spring Boot version. The latest Spring Boot version currently is 3.3.5. This is the latest one. Behind the scene, the latest Spring Boot version uses latest Spring framework. Right now, the latest Spring framework version is 6. So Spring Boot, latest Spring Boot uses internally latest Spring framework itself. So the current latest version at the time of recording this video is 6, and the latest Spring Boot version is 3.3.5. Group ID, it is like a package. I'll give it as com.tshaped. Great. And the artifact ID is equivalent to the project name. I'll give it as Spring Boot Application 1 is the name I have given here. And package name by default, based on the group ID and the artifact ID, it will be created, and this will be considered as the base package. So for the Spring Boot application, unlike we have done in our Spring application in the annotation approach, we have used component scanning and we have specified what is the base package. For the Spring Boot, you need not to explicitly specify. At the time of project creation, you can mention. So whatever package you mention here, that will become automatic base package. That means all the classes which are part of this package only will be scanned and considered by the Spring IOC container. If you create some other package once the application is developed, then those classes will not be considered by Spring IOC container. I want to go with the jar project and I want to use Java 17. The latest version which you have to use is Java 17. Since Java supports backward compatibility, if you are not aware of the new features of Java 17, 20, 21, you need not to worry on this. Java is a backward compatible programming language. So whenever there is a new feature, it's not compulsory for you to learn that. It's up to you whether you want to learn or not. However, even if you use Java 17 or 21 or 23, whatever Java you already know, that is more than sufficient. That existing Java knowledge will not affect. Fine. Now, whenever you want to work with any of the module of Spring, then we have an option here, add dependency. Example, I want to work with Data's API. We have to add this. I want to add MySQL database. We have to add the driver from here. Right now, I want to use the core feature of Spring framework, which is inversion of control and dependency injection and all the basic annotations which we have seen so far, for which you need not to add any extra dependency. The moment you generate the project, the basic core dependencies which is needed for your project will be automatically added. You need not to add any extra dependency. Apart from basic core features of Spring framework, if you want to develop a web application, then you have to add the dependency. If you want to work with actuators, you have to add the dependency. If you want to work with Data's API, then you have to add the dependency. For now, I want to work with the basic Spring core features which we have seen earlier in this existing. So I will not be adding any extra dependency. So what you have to do is, the moment you generate, one zip file will be downloaded in your download folders. I will just generate it and one zip file will be downloaded in my downloads. Now what I'll be doing is, from the downloads, I'll copy that and I will get to the workspace. The workspace for this particular application is Spring Boot YT. So I have created in my D drive, I have created one folder by the name Spring Boot YT. You can see here, I would like to show that here, Spring Boot YT. Within this, I will just paste it. So it was there in the download. The moment I have generated, right, it was downloaded. And one more point, in order to create this Spring Boot project, internet connection is required. If you don't have internet connection, then you cannot create this Spring Boot application. Fine. So I have generated, it was automatically downloaded as a zip file. I've got that to this particular folder because that is the workspace I'm working with. Now I will right click here, I'll say here, extract all. So extracted, and once you extract it, so you will be getting this project here. It is extracted. Now I'll go to my file. There is an option called as import. I'll say import the Maven, existing Maven project. Import existing Maven project. I would like to click it. I will say here next. I have to specify from which folder you have to import. I'll go Spring YT and I have extracted one project, Spring Boot App 1. I will click it. This is universal way to create because you're not dependent on the IDs to create this Spring Boot project. I'll say here finish. The moment you finish, you can see the project is loaded. That's all. Fine. I would like to close whatever we had developed so far, a basic annotation approach application. If you're new to this video, I would suggest you to watch the videos which we have covered. We started the journey from absolute scratch, and I'm pretty sure if you complete this entire series, you will have a good hold on the Spring core, the core of the Spring framework. Now you can see, guys, we have a Maven project. Pom.xml, which has a dependency. Spring Core will be there by default. If you have to check here, Maven dependencies, you can see all the Spring Boot basic, whatever dependencies are there. Alongside that, the other dependencies also added. As I've told, it's not just about the basic, it is more than auto configuration. I will discuss that going forward. Now we do have application.properties file. Whenever you have to write any of the configuration, we have to write within the application.properties or application.yaml. What is that? We will see that in detail going forward. You don't need to worry about it for now. I'll go here. We do have this class by default. We have not created. This class is auto generated when you're creating the Spring Boot application. A class which is annotated with Spring Boot application. The Spring Boot application is equivalent to the component scan annotation which we have used earlier, plus the enable auto configuration. I'll say here enable auto configuration. It is equivalent to these two annotations. So let me write here enable auto configuration. Okay, if you want, you can open and check. I would like to say here at the time of creating this annotation, Spring Boot team has done that. So let me just show you here. If I have to right click this and open the declaration, you can see it is having enable auto configuration and the component scan also. Making sense? So by default, the base package is com.tshape.springboot app1. You need not to specify explicitly. Automatically, it has considered this as the base package. If you create classes outside this package, if you create one more package in .tshape or some other classes, that will not be scanned. And you can see you need not to explicitly start the IOC container. So far, using the bean factory and application context, we have started the IOC container by our own. Right now, that is not needed. This run method, which is present inside the Spring application class, within this class, we have one static method. Internally, it will only start the IOC container. Auto configuration. We need not to write the code also. That's all, nothing. It was automatically created for us. And the remaining part will remain same. So I'll do one thing here. I'll go back to my previous application and whatever packages we had, of course, the package should be changed here. So let me create the maybe one more package here. The other annotation approach in the last video you have understood. So what I'm going to do here is I'll create a package here by keeping this as the base package. This will be the base package. I will say a dot maybe service. Great. And within this service, I'll create any of the class and you will be knowing it. You know already is what I have kept in mind. The basic service class here is I would like to give any class. Maybe I'll say here greetings class. Fine. Any class in that matter. It should not be a matter of concern. I'll go back here. And I would like to write one constructor to check if the bean is getting created or not. That is the end goal, right? We have to understand that. So I'll go here and say system.out.println, and within this, I will say here greetings bean created. And at the top of this, we have to add the stereotype annotation. We have discussed about this stereotype annotation in our video in this entire playlist. So what is a stereotype annotation which I will be adding here is nothing but service, because I'm going to write some business logic. That's the meaning of it. It is component plus business logic is equal to service. And as you all know, if you attach service, by default, Spring will understand that it has to take care of this class. So Spring will take care of object creation. Through this annotation, we are informing Spring Framework that please create object of this class. If Spring is creating the object of a class, then we call that as a bean. Fine. Now you can see I have not started. I have to refresh this. Let me just refresh and get it to the proper alignment. You can see I have not started any IOC container. This run method only will start, right? I'll go here and simply run this application. I'll say run as Java application or Spring Boot application. And you can see we are getting some logs. We have loggings here. You can see one of my video uploaded in Telesco YouTube channel, wherein I have taught logging in Java and Spring Boot application. What exactly this is, you can understand once after completing certain Spring Boot videos. Forget about this. Please see here, greeting bean is created. It is created by the Spring IOC container. But did I start Spring IOC container? No. Internally, it will only start. And the return type of this run method is application context itself. I have not created, right? I will just say here container, just to show you. You can see container, create a local variable of this. You can see configurable application context. So as I have discussed earlier also, the default IOC container Spring Boot uses is application context. We do have bean factory and application context, but in the Spring Boot application, it is application context which is getting used. And if I have to open this, I'll say right click, open the declaration. You can see it is an interface extending application context itself. That means it is a family of application context. So I need not to do that. It will be activated by the Spring itself, auto configuration. And to support this auto configuration, behind the scene, Spring Boot uses around 52 classes, 52 beans. You can check that here. I will say here, maybe container dot, I will say here, get bean, definition count. How many beans are there in the IOC container right now? That count is what I want to get it. I will say here, integer type of count. How many beans are there in the IOC container is what I'm checking here. System.out.println. I will say here count, and let me give one suitable message as well here. I will say here, maybe beans count in IOC container, okay, which is managed by Spring IOC. I would like to go here, right click, run as Java Spring Boot application. And I have to save this, of course. And you can see here the crowd which we are getting is 53. Why 53? Because one of the bean we are also creating, right? So we have asked our Spring to create a bean of this particular class. So 52 plus our own bean. So we have asked our Spring to create only this bean. But totally how many beans are there in the Spring IOC container? 52. 52 plus 1 we are asking. If you create more, then 52 plus how much ever beans you as a developer are creating. So totally 52 beans are there behind the scene to support this auto configuration by the Spring Boot. There are many other advantages also. This is one of the advantage of the Spring Boot, that it supports auto configuration. You need not to start the IOC container separately, right? You need not to do at the time of project creation, whatever dependencies you want, you can add at that instant itself. You can choose whether you want a Maven or Gradle. Spring Boot itself will create it for you. Fine. So more on this by default, as and when we progress in this entire series, you will understand. I have kept in mind you have watched last 2 videos, annotation approach videos. Please do watch before making it to this video. Then I'm pretty sure you will understand what is the context here. So those who are attending from the scratch, this entire playlist, they could able to understand everything here, that how Spring Boot is better than the Spring framework. So the latest version of Spring Boot right now in the market is Spring Boot 3, and the Spring framework is 6. And Spring Boot internally uses the latest Spring framework itself. So Spring Boot 3, and internally it is uses Spring framework 6 itself. So even if you are using Spring Boot, you are working with Spring framework. Spring Boot is one of the way to work with Spring framework. Remember this point. You can develop the Spring application without Spring Boot, with Spring Boot. We have developed so far 5 to 6 applications without the Spring Boot. Now we are developing the application with the Spring Boot. It is easier to work with Spring framework if you go with Spring Boot. How it is easier? If you have watched the previous videos, then you will appreciate this video, that how easy it is. So I would suggest you to watch those videos. In this video, we will understand one more crucial topic, which is about bean lifecycle. It is important as a Spring Boot developer as well as from the point of interview. Before we get into this, I would request you to join the WhatsApp channel. The link you can find in the description as well as in the community post. Very soon I'm coming up with the Udemy courses, affordable Udemy courses. So in this channel, I'll be posting the early bird offers, the free Udemy courses coupons, and many more. Please do consider joining this WhatsApp channel. You can find the link in the description. Having said that, let's get started. As you all know that if there is an Java object, what is the life cycle of a normal Java object? During the class loading, whatever code you keep inside the static block, that gets executed. Usually we use static block if there is to initialize the static variables. However, whatever code you keep inside this static block, that gets executed without you invoking automatically during the class loading. If you know the JVM architecture, if not, very soon in this channel I am coming up with the JVM architecture video also. During the class loading, whatever code you write within the static block, that gets executed. And when you create the instance, when you create the object of a class, constructor will be called. Before the body of the constructor, the Java instance block, Java initialization block gets executed, which is also called as non-static block or normal Java block. Whatever code you keep inside the Java instance block, that gets executed. Then the body of the constructor, whatever code you write within the constructor, that will get executed. Then whatever methods you have, the business logic which you have written, if you invoke them, they will get executed. This is the typical life cycle of a normal Java object. Now for what we call Spring Bean. Spring Bean is also an object. However, that object is created and managed by Spring Framework. Within the Spring IOC container, object will be created by the Spring IOC container, and the management of that object also will be done by Spring IOC container. If a Java object is created and managed by Spring IOC container, we usually call that as the bean. So what is the life cycle of a bean? That is what we need to understand here. You can see we have a constructor, and you know very well, whenever you create the instance of this class, constructor will get executed. And as I have told you, this class object will be created by Spring IOC container. If it is created by the Spring Framework, then it will only invoke this, and whenever this bean is getting created, whatever code you write within this constructor, that will get executed. I would like to include the other things also here. I will say here static, and I will have a static instance block, static initialization block, or you can say static block. I'll say here system.out.println. I will say static block. And then we have a constructor. I would like to include the non-static block also. This is called as non-static block, Java initialization block, Java instance block, multiple names. I would like to go here and write system.out.println. I will say here Java block, non-static Java block. I'll say here non-static Java initialization block. And we have a constructor. I will just write here bean is created. I will say here constructor, and I would like to include one method, business logic method. Maybe I would like to say here public. I will say here string, maybe whatever you want, you can write string. I will say here generate some wish or the greetings. I will say here return maybe some message. I'll say here good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever you want, some message. Okay, so good night. Great. Some business logic is there, some normal method we have here. Fine. Now at the top of this class, I have attached one stereotype annotation service, referring to this class has the business logic. That is a meaning. Anyway, if you use any of the annotation at the top of the class, which you have understood earlier also, it could be component, service, repository, or the controller, REST controller. This class is managed by Spring. That means this object will be created and managed by Spring IOC container. If it is created and managed by Spring IOC container, in that case, you can call this as the bean. Now we need to understand the bean lifecycle. I would like to go here and run this application. Of course, I don't want to know the count of how many beans behind the scene are getting created, which we have understood in the last video. I would like to go here, right click, run as the Java or Spring application. If I have to run this, let me just save and run this application. And please observe the console here, static block, non-static Java installation block, and constructor. Like a normal Java object, same way, whatever components we usually get executed in a normal Java program, same thing is getting executed in the bean also. Of course, the business logic, the business method will be executed only if you have, I'll say get bean, invoke that method. I would like to go here, and whatever the class name, I would like to get it, because this class is now, this bean is now available with the Spring IOC container. I would like to go here and I will ask my Spring, please give me a bean of this particular class, because you are the one who's maintaining. I'm asking the Spring IOC container, please give me that. And I would request you to watch the previous video of the Spring Core series before coming to this. I have discussed so much on the Spring Core. I am keeping in mind that those who are watching this video knows the Spring Core fundamentals, which we have discussed in the previous video. I would like to go back here and maybe I'll say here greeting type, maybe greet is a reference variable. Okay, all right. I would like to invoke the business method which we have there. I would like to say generate the wish. Directly I would like to keep within the system.out.println, because I want to print on my console. So I would like to just print this, save this, and run this application once again. Right click, run as Spring Boot Java application, and you can notice on the console, static block, non-static Java initialization block, greetings being created, and also good night. That means you're getting the business logic. Like they were normal Java objects, same way Spring Bean is also behaving. However, there is something extra with respect to the bean. Any method which is annotated with post construct will get executed after bean creation. After bean creation means object creation, which is after the constructor. After the constructor means whatever is there inside the constructor that will get executed. Whatever is there in the Java block that will be executed. During the class loading, whatever is there in the static block that also will be executed. So after constructor, before the actual business logic, any method it could be, I'll say public void, any method, I'll give the method name as init. The method name need not to be init. You can give your own name, not a matter of concern. Any method which is annotated with post construct, I'll say here, post construct will be executed by the Spring. So I'll say here post construct. I'll say here construct. I would like to import this and I'll keep this maybe system.out.println. I'll say here bean init method. And at the end, after executing everything, after executing the business logic methods and everything, at the end by default, I will write one method here, maybe void, I will say here destroy. The method name need not to be destroy. The name of the method, whatever you want, you can give it. But I have kept it, which is similar to the purpose of this particular method. So I'll say here, maybe bean destroyed. Any logic you want, you can write here. I'm just printing system.out.println. It could be anything else also. Any method which is annotated with pre-destroy will be executed at the end. Okay, I have saved this. You can see we have a destroy method, we have a init method. Am I invoking anywhere? You can see here anywhere. Am I invoking init method and destroy method? No, I'm not invoking. Any method which is annotated with post construct annotation will be executed automatically after the constructor, after the bean creation. After the bean creation, I'm referring to after the constructor execution, because you know very well, whenever you create a bean, whenever you create an object, constructor will get executed, after which automatically you need not to call that method, you need not to invoke that method. This will be executed. And at the end, after everything is over, at last, automatically whatever method is there which is annotated with pre-destroy will be executed by Spring IOC container. And that is what I want to show here. Right click, run as Java application. I have to run this. I'll open the console. You can see here we are getting bean init method. This particular statement I had written inside the init method, which is annotated with post construct, also bean destroyed. So this message I had written inside a method which is annotated with pre-destroy. So the typical bean lifecycle is similar to the Java lifecycle. One difference here is any method after the constructor, after bean creation, any method which is annotated with post construct will be executed. It could be any method. At the last, anything, whatever business logic methods there, based on you calling those methods, that will be executed. At the end, you need not to explicitly invoke this method. Any method, if you just annotate it with pre-destroy, will be executed automatically by Spring IOC container. So typical bean lifecycle, static block, Java installation block, constructor will be getting executed, and during this itself, if there is anything to be dependent, so dependency injection also will be performed at this stage itself. What is dependency injection? In depth we have understood in our previous videos. And then if there are any business logic, that will be executed at last, before executing everything or after executing everything. At last, automatically a method with pre-destroy will be executed. So a method which is annotated with post construct will be executed after constructor execution. That means after bean creation. And a method with pre-destroy will be executed after all the business logic methods are over at the end. And these methods which is annotated with post construct and pre-destroy, you need not to invoke them explicitly, automatically they will be executed. And this is the life cycle of the Spring Bean. I hope if you know the Java properly, core Java properly, and if you have watched the previous videos, you are in a position to understand this. Now let's develop one more application with Spring Boot. Before you coming to this video, I would request you to watch a video Spring Core with annotation approach. If you watch that video and then make it to this video, you will get more clarity. And this is a very simple application, a greetings application based on the current time of the system. It will generate whether it is good morning, good afternoon. It will generate a wish, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or the good night. It could be any wish in that way based on the current time. Now I have created one layer, service layer, within which I have written one class where actual business, actual purpose of the application will be written inside this class. And if you want this object to be created and managed by the Spring IOC container, at the top of the class you have to apply any of the stereotype annotation. And the most suitable stereotype annotation is service here. If you say service, service is component plus the business logic. So this bean will now be managed by the Spring IOC container. Also, it gives a message to developer that inside this class, the business logic, the actual purpose of the application is written. Fine. Now I have created the constructor to know if the bean is created, and here is where I will generate the actual business logic. Now I would like to use the current time of to get the current time of the system which I have. You can use the date class available in the SQL package or the util package, or you can use the local date, local time, and local date time class, which is coming from the Joda API, which is added in your Java from Java 8 onwards, a new date and time API. I would like to go with the new date and time API, which is there in the Java. Fine. For which I can use local time. I want to know the time. I'll say local time dot now. This will give you the current time. Now method will generate a time object, and it's not recommended to create the object within the logic where you are actually writing the business. And if you create the object by yourself, this will not be part of Spring IOC container. Whenever you are developing an application, try to make it loosely coupled. Hand over the entire control of object creation, or hand over all the objects of your application to the Spring IOC container. If as a developer you yourself creating the object, then Spring IOC container will not have any details about this object. What to do? Do we have an access wherein we can open the local time class? At the top of this class, can we add any of the stereotype annotation? Because you know very well, if you add stereotype annotation at the top of a class, then Spring will consider that as the bean. Spring will create the object, correct? But can we open this local time, which is a predefined class? Can we open and can we modify? The answer is no. But do we have a solution? Yes. If you watch the annotation approach, you might know the solution. If not, I'll be creating here. I'll go here and create one more package. The package, I'll give it as configuration. Config, that is the package. And within this package, let me just refresh this first. I would like to refresh. I will create one configuration class. Right click. And I'll give the name of the class as maybe date config or time config, whatever name you want you can give. I'll say here maybe a time configuration. That's the name of this class. I'll say here time configuration or bean configuration, whatever you want you can give. And the most suitable annotation which you have to apply at the top of this class where you are writing the configuration code is configuration. You will be knowing it if you have watched the annotation approach video or Spring Core video so far, which we have covered in this entire series. Okay, I have applied, and to know whether the bean is created or not, I would be creating one constructor here. I will say here public, and I'll give one message just to know if the bean is also created. I will say system.out.println, and within the double quotes I'll say here bean created. Great. Now I will be writing a method. I'll say public, and I'll say local time. Local time. I'll say here create time instance, and after which I'll go within this, of course, time instance. I'll create the object of time. If you want to create object of time, date, local date and time with respect to new date and time API, you cannot use new keyword. We have to invoke one of the static method, now method, that will create a new date and time object. That is about the Java. I will say here local time dot now. This method will create a time object, and I would like to collect the time object here. I will say here local time, the object is ready, and now I will say here return the time object. And you know very well, to the method, if you attach bean, it's a message to the Spring IOC container that look, I have created the instance of this object. However, I'm handing over to you. You consider this as a part of Spring IOC container. The moment you do that, even though you as a developer has created the object of this class, Spring will consider as the bean. Usually what I have said earlier, if we create the object, we say normal Java object, normal Java instance. If the same object is created and managed by the Spring IOC container, we call that as Spring Bean. But right now as a developer, I myself creating this object, but still this can be called as Spring Bean. Why? After creating the object, I am handing over this object to the Spring IOC container by applying the bean annotation. Last video, earlier also we had discussed the concept of bean. Now I'm showing you the real use case of the bean annotation. For the predefined classes, we do not have access. We cannot open those classes and attach the stereotype annotation at the top of that class, right? So what I can do is I can create the instance and I can return that. And to this method, I can attach bean annotation. It is a message to the Spring that I am creating the object, but please consider this as the Spring Bean. Great. Now, Spring Time. The time object is with the Spring IOC container also. I would like to go to my business logic. I will say here private, maybe I'll say here local time. I will say here local time, type time. All right. And to this, I will say here auto void. You know very well, auto void means dependency injection. Directly to the field, if you apply, it is a field injection. Recommended way to go with the setter injection. I would agree with this, but now I would like to go with the field injection. Now, do IOC container has the time object? The answer is yes. How? Because we ourselves created the time object, and the time object we have handed over to Spring IOC container. I hope you could able to understand now. So now since it is a part of IOC container, Spring will perform the dependency injection. The actual time object will be injected here. So we do have a time object here. Now I will check if in case time, maybe I'll do one thing. I'll say here time dot get r. I'll collect that r within a variable called as integer type of r. And I'll say if the r is less than 12, the r is less than 12, I will say here, please do return good night or maybe good morning. Of course, it is good morning. I'll say here, good morning. And nothing apart from that. Okay. Good morning. And since it is a one line, I need not to use this curly brackets. And you all know about this core Java part. I need not to explicitly explain you this. After which I'll say here, else if the r is less than 16, if it is less than 16, then I would like to return good afternoon. Because after 12, before 16, it is afternoon. I will say here, good afternoon. Okay. Good afternoon. Of course, I'll say here afternoon and the spelling mistake. Yep. After which, again, I will check here. Else if the time is less than 20, I would like to return this as good evening. I will say here, please return good evening. Of course, if it is not less than 12, not less than 16, not less than 20, then by default it is above 20, which is good night. I will say here else return. I would like to just say one message here, good night. Fine, very simple application. But more than that, what we have earlier understood about the annotations, bean annotation, configuration annotation, the service annotation, I'm just trying to show with this application. In the process, we have developed one more Spring Boot application. I would like to save this, and this method I would like to invoke from the main class. Right now, we don't have the web layer. We don't have the layer where we have the annotations controller or the REST controller. We have not yet seen that. Going forward, we will see that. But for now, I would like to invoke that method from the main method itself. I would like to go here and run this application. Right click, run as the Java Spring Boot application, and you can see if I have to show you the console, we are getting good morning based on the current time of my system. When I'm recording this video, it is morning, so it is good morning. I hope you could able to understand. Now let's continue the journey of Spring Core. We are learning the Spring Boot. We have developed the applications, and now in this application we will understand the important annotations such as qualifier, primary, and auto wire. We have seen about the auto wiring in the XML approach as well as in the annotation approach also, for which I have taken the same example which we have taken earlier in this entire series. Those who don't know, I would like to just give a walkthrough on this. I have two service classes and I have followed the strategy design pattern to develop those service classes. I have coded to interface. We have an interface here, and with this interface I have specified what is my requirement, right? I have specified that this method has to be implemented, and there are two courses which are implementing this particular method. I'll say here number one is Java course. You can see class Java implements I course, and also we have one more class which is Spring Boot. Spring Boot implements I course. These two classes are implementing I course and give the implementation for the method of that particular interface. Now with that, if you know the basic Java also, now Spring Boot class as well as the Java class, they are of type I course. That means both of them are implementing I course, and the parent to Java class and Spring Boot class is I course. So these two classes are of type I course. And the top of these classes, I have used the stereotype annotation service. When to use the service annotation, we have understood earlier also. And it is just that we have some business logic here. This business logic can be used by other classes, some important logic of this application. And I want this class to be this object to be created and managed by the Spring IOC container. We have to use some of the stereotype annotation. And since we have some important logic within this class, we have used service. The significance of service we have seen earlier also. You can see Spring Boot also service. Since I have used service here, that means the object of this class will be created by Spring IOC container. It is created and managed by the Spring framework. Now I would like to go to my class, a T-shaped skills class. Inside this class, whatever methods, a business logic which is present inside the Spring Boot class, inside the Java class, I would like to invoke. That means T-shaped class is using the services which are coded inside the Spring Boot and Java. And I have created the reference of I course because T-shape and Java, both of them are of I course type because they are implementing this I course interface. Great. And using this course, I'm invoking this method. Wonderful. Now I have to perform the dependency injections, and since right now all these classes, all these objects are managed by Spring framework, they are called as beans. I will say here, I want one object to be injected here. You can go with the field injection, setter injection, or the constructor injection. Suppose if you want to go to the constructor injection, I'll go to the top of this class and I will say here auto void. Similarly, we had seen in the XML approach. Now I would like to show with the annotation approach. I'll say here auto void. Great. The moment I say here auto void, that means I am asking my Spring framework plus please perform the dependency injection using this setter. Inside the setter, we are accepting one type of input. What type of input? I course type of input. Now tell me, the top of the Java class also I have used service. Top of the Spring Boot class also I have used service. Great. That means my IOC container is maintaining the bean of Spring Boot also, maintaining the bean of Java also. And these both classes are of type I course. This is also are of type I course, and this Java class is also of type I course. That means if I ask my Spring that please perform the dependency injection using this setter, now there are two objects available with the Spring framework which is of type I course. One is Java, one is Spring. Now which object my Spring IOC container has to inject here? Which object will be injected? There will be ambiguity. None of the object will be injected. Something similar we had seen earlier also in the XML approach. I would like to go here, right click. I will say here run as the Java application. If I have to execute this application, let me save and execute it. And you can see on the console, let me show you on the console. And we have an issue here, application failed to start. And you can see we will be getting the same. T-shape skills required a single bean but found two. What do you mean by that? Here, if I have to go back, I have asked my Spring framework to perform the dependency injection. That means inject such a object which is of type I course. Now with the Spring IOC container, there are two objects which is of type I course. One is Java bean, one is Spring Boot bean, right? Now out of two which I have to inject, the Spring IOC container is confused and it is not able to inject. Now I'll go any of this class, I'll go here and I will use one annotation called as primary. Like the way in the XML approach we had used the primary attribute, here we would like to use the primary annotation. That means I'm asking whenever the situation of dependency injection comes, please inject Java object. This is the primary object. That's the meaning of it. Now, when the Spring IOC container will perform the dependency injection, at that moment, Spring will inject Java object here, because at the top of Java bean, I have told primary. It is a primary. Whenever the situation of dependency injection comes into picture, please do inject Java object, like the way we had used primary attribute in our XML approach. Now, I would like to go back to my main class, and I would like to say here container dot get bean. Of course, same code. I would like to say here, please get me the bean of T-shape skills, because there is some business method which I want to invoke manually. I would like to just go back here and say dot class, and of course I would like to just import it, and it will give me some method. Maybe I'll say here T-shape. Okay, T-shaped, and it will give me the bean of this. And using this bean, I would like to just invoke, I'll say here maybe T-shape dot. I would like to buy the course, and I'll pass some amount here. Okay, I'll say here 444.4, any amount. Okay, it will give me a Boolean value. Same, the remaining story is same as what we have seen earlier. If you are a part of the journey, even if you are not a part of journey, it should not create any problem to you. This all the basics of Java. I will say here, if the status is true, I would like to just say system.out.println. I will say here course purchased, or I'll say here else system.out.println. I will say here fail to buy the course. Great. Right, I'll say here fail to buy the course. Any message of your own choice. It should not be creating any problem. Now I would like to go back here, right click, run as the Java application or the Spring Boot application based on the IDE which you are using here. And if I have to execute this, you can see all the beans have been created. Great, because we have applied stereotype annotation at the top of those classes, and setter is called for the setter injection. And you can see Java course method. That means whatever logic which is written inside this, it is getting printed. That means this method is getting invoked. If this method is getting invoked, that shows here which object is injected. This Java object is injected, because there are two eligible objects present. Spring Boot parent is also iCourse, and Java parent is also iCourse. And here, if I have to ask, please inject any object which is of iCourse, both of them are eligible. Earlier it was creating any no problem, but now it could able to inject because of the primary. Apart from primary, we can use one more annotation which is very popular annotation which we use here, which is qualifier. I can just go here and I will say here qualifier. I'll say here qualifier, and I'll say here out of 2, which object, which bean is qualified. I'll go here and I'll give the bean ID. If you want, you can specify the bean ID at the time of using this stereotype annotation like this. If you don't give, whatever is the class name, camel case of the class name will be the bean ID, which automatically Spring Framework will create. Right now, I myself is creating this Java. Maybe I'll say here J. That means this is the bean ID. If suppose I have not given this value, then automatically whatever is the camel case of the class name, that will be the bean ID, about which we have seen earlier also. So the bean ID will be Java. I would like to ask here, please inject the Java object. Using the qualifier also, you can do this. I'll say here, and let me go back and execute this application once again. And if I have to run this, you can see Java object is injected. Java course. If you want, you can give the name of Spring Boot. What's the camel case of the Spring Boot? Because I have not specified any bean ID here. If you want, you can specify. If you don't specify, the camel case of the Spring Boot, the camel case of the Spring Boot would be, maybe I'll say here Spring Boot. This is the camel case of the Spring Boot with the bean ID. Okay. I've asked, please inject the Spring Boot object. Right click, run as Java application. If I have to execute this, you can see Spring Boot course is successfully purchased. And this qualifier annotation and auto wiring you can do at the field level also. So far we have seen only setter injection and the constructor injection. You can do the field injection at the top of field also directly. You can specify. I would like to save this, and maybe just to have some changes, I would like to change it to Java object, and I'll say out of 2 objects, please qualify Java at the time of dependency injection, at the time of automatic dependency injection. That's the meaning of it. I'll say right click, and especially if you're a part of this journey from the beginning, you must be knowing it. And I'll say here Java, Great. You can see Java object is injected. And one important point is that this qualifier annotation you cannot apply to a constructor. To the constructor you can say auto while, but not the qualifier. It is disallowed. So in that case, you can apply to the parameter level. At this level, you can apply whenever you're performing the constructor injection. You cannot use qualifier. Qualifier can be applied to the field directly, can be applied to a setter, but not to a constructor. That is very, very important, message. And you can apply to the parameter variable level. Okay. I would like to go back here and right click. And before I run this, I would like to show one more point that what if we have both primary and the qualifier, whether qualifier will dominate primary or primary will dominate qualifier. I'll say here, qualifier, and within this I would like to say here maybe SpringBoot. Please inject SpringBoot. Great. And if I have to go back, Java have applied primary. Now please inject this. This is primary. And what did I say here? Qualifier SpringBoot. Right. So now qualifier will dominate the primary annotation or primary will dominate the qualifier is what we may have to see here. I'll say right click, run as the Java application. If I have to execute this, and please do see here, SpringBoot course is getting injected. That means if you have both primary and qualifier will be dominating the primary. So the more valuable annotation here is qualifier. Qualifier annotation will give the preference over the primary annotation. I hope you could able to understand. So whenever you perform the dependence injection and if there is any ambiguity, if multiple beans are eligible for a dependence injection, in that case you have to use the primary and the qualifier annotation. Especially if you're a part of the journey from the beginning, I'm pretty sure you could able to understand everything. If not, please do watch whatever videos we have covered so far. So consider please following me on the Instagram, also on the LinkedIn, and do join our WhatsApp channel, wherein we'll be sharing the Udemy courses. I'll not be sharing the Udemy courses free coupons directly on the platforms because it is getting viral and people not from the Java background, and just because it is free, they are trying to take up the course and they are giving the negative reviews. They are not even from the background of Java. So I don't want that to happen. So I want only serious learners. So those who are part of the WhatsApp channel, for them, in future, all my Udemy courses free coupons also would be given. Fine. So thank you again for joining me in this video. We will meet again in next video.